Phew. Good morning. A lot has happened, obviously, in recent weeks. I do apologise for the lack of content on the channel in the last couple of weeks, but it's that time of year where it's getting close to Christmas, and work has been very busy, and I had my birthday, and there's a lot of viruses going around, so I was feeling a bit under the weather the last couple of weeks, so I just zoned out and didn't put as much effort to the channel. But a lot has happened in the world of sport. A lot has happened. So the NRL players have started doing some. There's been some media commitments over in Vegas. There's been a lot of discussion around the players that were sent to Vegas this week. Aaron Woods being one that has got a bit ridiculed by some fans, considering that he's not in the elite 30 squad of the Manly Sea Eagles. But the NRL is now starting its media ramping up of the Vegas games. It looks like about 10,000 tickets have been sold to Australian fans. There's only a handful of tickets left. They range from $19 for a single seat to $119. So pricing's actually not that bad. If you can get your hands on tickets, they're not overly expensive, which is interesting. Uh, Footballing side of things, Manchester United and Newcastle United both crashed out the Champions League group stages, both finishing bottom of their groups. Now, Newcastle's case, first European campaign in a while, a lot of injuries, squad depth being tested. Manchester United, though, the manner of some of their defeats, not only in Europe but in the league as well, raising a lot of questions about the direction the team is taking under Eric Ten Hag, and with the backdrop of the ownership of the Glazers, and is Sir Jim Radcliffe going to take over a minority stake, eventually being a controlling stake? What's going on with the ownership? What's going on with selections and transfer policy and Ten Hag's management style, and what's going on within the structures of the football club? Chelsea, they're all over the place as well. They've spent a lot of money, and Pochettino coming out and saying we need to go back to the transfer market to fix our problems. They've spent over £1 billion in transfers. That's a bit ridiculous. There's obviously all the issues with multiple clubs with off-field issues. Reading, I mean, they could be in administration within a few weeks. They regularly struggling to pay players and non-playing staff on time. So there's potential for more points deductions there. Everton, there's the potential for them to go into administration and further points deductions there. There is an investigation to Chelsea over some transfer dealings under the Abramovich era. There's a couple of breaches that are now being investigated. Obviously, we've still got the ongoing Man City investigation as well into their financial aspects of how the club is run off the field. So there's a lot going on at Man City. Earliest we can expect a result in the Man City investigation is 2025, which is a very interesting date. Also, this is the last season that we will have Champions League group stages. For now, they go into the Swiss format. The whole structure of the Champions League changes from next season. Yeah, I can't see that working and being beneficial. I can see a lot of fans being unhappy with that, and we'll see what attendances are like and viewership figures on the TV are like. But I think the format changes. I can see UEFA very quickly regretting making those changes to the Champions League format. Um, some other clubs, English clubs and Scottish clubs, had some really good successes in Europe this season. Rangers, Brighton, West Ham have had really good seasons in Europe, getting through to the knockout stages in Europe as well. So there's some good and some bright points, and then there's some low points. But at the moment, when it comes to football at the moment, Manchester United and Chelsea, who's going to get sacked first? I think is the question. Is it going to be Ten Hag? Is it going to be Pochettino? Which manager is going to be out the door first? I mean, obviously Manchester United play Liverpool at Anfield this weekend, so there's a lot of eyes on that important match. The teams are poles apart in where they are. Liverpool have scored double the amount of goals that Manchester United have, and obviously in a much stronger position in both in Europe and in the league. So, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And it's going to be interesting to see what actually happens. They lost to Bournemouth at home, they lost to Bayern Munich at home. If they lose, I think the Liverpool match could go a long way to see, sealing Ten Hag's fate. Because if you are going to make a change, you want to make a change before the transfer window opens. Um, if he's still there at the end of the January transfer window, I think United are in serious, serious trouble, and we'll see if their season implodes. But there's a lot of issues at that football club. Um, Rugby league news: the RFL are going to bring in new tackling laws from next season or from next year, which will then be brought to the Super League in 2025, lowering the tackle height. Yeah, that's been roundly ridiculed by players and fans because of the amount of ex-players who were suing the game basically because they couldn't tackle properly. Is my basic point. Look, the way to solve this is just improve the HIA protocols. You don't change the tackle height just because guess what? Head high shots have always been illegal in the game. You've got to enforce the rules of the game. And rugby league in the UK doesn't have the money to fight a lawsuit. Basically, does not have the money. It will bankrupt it. And the risk is, much like rugby union with their changed tackle rules, which are going down like a sack of shit, is that um, you know what should have been happening with the governing bodies was enforcing the rules. The referees on the field need to send players off for headshots. Players need to be properly sent for HIAs. Even if they pass, they still, I don't think, should be allowed to return on the field because you can have delayed concussion. I think changing the tackle height, I think, is going to destroy the community game and impact the professional game as well to a point where we could see, less fans turning up to watch the spectacle not being as good, and therefore less money made, and therefore less even less profitable than it already is. I mean, the sport is not in a good place. Not in a good place at all. Um, you know, uh, the money is not there. There's a reason why the Super League lags far behind where the NRL is at. Something has happened over the last 10 to 15 years in rugby league, in this, maybe 20 years, where the NRL has now there's this massive gap in quality week on week, consistency, quality level, fitness level, um, and the gap is getting bigger. And people will say, "Oh, but St Helens won the World Club Challenge at the beginning of the year," and you can say yes because the conditions favoured an English style of play because it pissed down with rain in Penrith. Um, I don't think that will be. Will Wigan beat Penrith in the World Club Challenge? We shall see. We shall see if Wigan can beat Penrith in the World Club Challenge, or if Penrith can finally win a World Club Challenge, because that's the only thing they can't seem to win. Apparently, is a World Club Challenge. They've won everything else. But humour aside, rugby league, much like rugby union, a lot of players and fans are criticising reactionary rule changes, whereby instead of actually enforcing the existing rules, because headshots have always been illegal, um, they're basically trying to fundamentally change how the game is played to a point where it's unrecognisable from where it was 20 years ago. And that's what you don't want is a fan who somebody may have watched the game when they were younger. For whatever reason, they stop watching. They come back and watch a game and they don't recognise it. You don't want that with a sport where a returning fan who may have taken a few years out from watching the game or playing the game doesn't recognise the sport that they are watching. You do risk, potentially killing off your fan base, or alienating your fan base completely. While concussions and repeat head injuries and CTE is a thing, and we have to obviously look into more research into figuring out how we can combat it, maybe reverse some of the damage done, because science is always a magical thing. And new treatments are become available and new research becomes available. How about you just enforce the existing rules? Headshots were never allowed. It's just you're never going to get head contact out of the game, and lowering the tackle height, you may actually increase the rate of concussion for the defensive player. And dirty acts were always, have always been there, and there's always been dirty play. How about you just punish the dirty play rather than punishing good, clean, fair tackling? It's a thing. Um, they rugby. I mean, it will have an impact on the NRL eventually. There will be similar rule changes brought in rugby league in Australia at some point. Um, Already fans are already saying the game is starting to go too soft. It's lost that gladiatorial aspect somewhat. It's not the sport that we remember from 20 years prior. But I think rather than changing the rules, how about the leagues, uh, professional leagues, actually look after their players when they are clearly injured? Don't allow them to play unless they pass protocols. It has been a little while. I had my birthday last week. I was a bit under the weather. Eh, Weather being cold as well, I just didn't feel 100%, and I just really just zoned out. Just felt a bit off. Work's been chronic chaotic. I've got my Christmas schedule, so I get the Christmas Day and Boxing Day off, but then the next 3-4 weeks after that are just chronic. I've got one 6-day week where I'm working Monday to Saturday, so um, the following 3 weeks after from Christmas Day onwards is 3-4 weeks are absolutely chaotic, and so therefore everything goes a bit mental. Obviously, the FA Cup replays have obviously been on the TV. I didn't actually watch them, but there's been so much controversy surrounding this FA Cup so far, with Barnsley being thrown out and Forest Green Rovers being forced to replay a first round match because of fielding players who shouldn't have been on the field. Um, it seems one punishment for one club, one punishment for another. So we've already seen a bit of controversy in this FA Cup. It's going to be interesting when the third round starts. Oh yeah, no, I've been following that as well. The incident in Turkey. Yeah, he's been banned for life. He already had stood down as soon as you know. But look, we have seen incidents before. And there was an incident in Greece where a Greek club owner came on the pitch with a loaded revolver and threatened to shoot a referee. So this is not a new thing, but there's a reason why we're struggling to recruit referees. There's a reason why we're struggling to retain referees and officials at all levels in all sports. There is an officials shortage. There is a shortage of officials from grassroots level all the way up to the top. Now, with the amount of money in professional sport now, I mean, should all refs and linos and video refs all be professional? I think there's enough money in sport to do that. But the abuse they receive, I mean, look, we can criticise a referee and go, okay, this referee has made a few clangers, or this referee's done this and that, but it's a bad. I mean, it's not a good look for Turkish football, which has already got a lot of issues within Turkish football, but it's not a good look considering that this is a FIFA level referee. This is like Turkey's best referee. This is not like an inexperienced ref. This is one of the best referees in the European game. One of the best referees on the global game, and yeah, it's not a good look. But we're seeing this happen all the time, and at grassroots level across the spectrum. Um, across the world. Where we're seeing it in junior levels of the game, under 11s, under 15s, where officials are taking quite a bit of abuse from fans and managers and players. There is going to come a point where this is going to happen again. I think this will happen again. And it will happen in a bigger, more important match. It will happen in a bigger, more high-profile league. I'm not saying that the Turkish league is of low quality, but it will happen, like, let's say, in one of the big five European leagues, as the media like to call it. It will happen, and when that does happen, you know, look at the social media interest and look at the internet meltdown over a game in Turkey where the referee is assaulted by a team owner. It's going to happen. It will happen where a club official, manager. Remember Paolo Di Canio all those years ago against Sheffield Wednesday when he was playing for Sheffield Wednesday. Um, You know, it will happen on a bigger flashpoint. There will be a much bigger flashpoint. Um, Other sports seem to deal better with abuse of officials. Rugby league and rugby union. I mean, ice hockey. You're getting a suspension just by verbally abusing the official. If you say something um, that crosses a line, uh, you can get games and you can get a lot of games. Um, Yeah, look, I mean, South America and Asia. I mean, it's South America. It's chaos. Asia, it's chaos. But no, it's something that unfortunately in football is commonplace. Quite commonplace from grassroots level all the way to the top level. But in other sports, there's a lot more emphasis on respect of the officials. And look, I've been to many ice hockey games and quite a few rugby union matches as well, where especially ice hockey, I've been to the most. I've been to hundreds of ice hockey matches, and every time there's a penalty called, so I mean, you get 2 or 5 minutes, or a 10-minute misconduct, or a game misconduct. Every time that there's a penalty announcement, the players sit in the penalty box. There's an automatic announcement with the penalty minutes of what each player, like X players received. Number 22 on Team A has received 2 minutes for a slash and 2 minutes for a roughing call. So that's 4 minutes in penalties. Uh, Player 17 on Team B has received 2 minutes for roughing because of retaliation, and that's his penalties. But you will also hear unsportsmanlike conduct, abuse of an official, and players get suspensions. Players get suspensions. We've seen it. We've seen it. Dylan Hartley, famously, when he was playing for Northampton Saints, called Wayne Barnes an effing cheat. Called him a fucking cheat. He was not happy as captain of the Saints. He was not happy with how the game was going. They were losing. There was a contentious call, and he literally just called the referee a cheat. He basically accused the referee favouring the other side and giving them favourable calls, and he got, I think, 8 weeks suspension. Adam Fanua Blake, when he was playing for the Manly Sea Eagles before he moved to the New Zealand Warriors, something similar happened at the end of a very contentious game a couple of years ago in the NRL. He called the referee something similar, if not stronger language, and he got quite a few games on the sideline. I think he got a massive fine as well. I think he got copped quite a few $1,000. Um, so I, I can't remember how many matches DiCanio got for his incident back in the 90s, but it was shocking news at the time. Made massive headlines, front and back page at the time. Um, the referee in question, I can't remember the referee in question, but I don't think he refereed much longer after that. I think he decided, I don't think he's even still alive, but I don't think the referee in question refereed for much longer following um, that incident. But that was seen as something that, you know that was a watershed moment. But no, I think we're at that crossroads now where there's a lot happening in sport. There's a lot of contentious decisions. There's a lot of money on the line. It's the finances have completely changed. Um, but it's becoming, one decision can be the difference between winning a title, like making a European spot, avoiding relegation, prize money, winning a cup final. Um, the amount of money that's associated with that, the amount of revenue that is associated with refereeing decisions um, and their outcomes. Um, a lot of money on the line. A lot of money on the line. So the pressure is there. So I wouldn't be surprised if we are going to see more and more of these type of incidents um, in football. But look, we've seen it before in other sports, and we've seen um, players and coaches get really lengthy suspensions and heavy fines for lesser incidents, but abusive officials. It's like we've seen coaches get touchline bans for criticising and verbally berating officials. We've seen players get lengthy bans for various things. Um, but it's something that Wayne Barnes, the former rugby union ref who recently retired, has discussed in interviews that the following the World Cup final, where I don't think he had a particularly, I think towards the latter stages of the Rugby World Cup, the referees didn't have a particularly good time of it. The rule changes that have been brought in, I think, when you have other former refs going, there's too much involvement with the video ref. We're ruining the game. The game is changing and not in a good way. The rules are too many new rules have been brought in, too reactionary, too many rule changes, too common. But then you get to the point where Wade Barnes was very, very open about the abuse he had been receiving throughout his career, but especially, um, you know, following the World Cup final and some other key games that he's refed in the last few years, and that contributed to his decision to go. I'm tiring. I've had enough. Um, it's going to impact refereeing performance. It's got to have an impact. If you're being constantly berated and abused, it is going to ultimately have an impact on your ability to perform. Quite frankly, I think that is a major issue. Um, But talking about rugby union, Eddie Jones has been renamed Japan coach for the second time. Obviously, during the World Cup, there was rumours circulating that he had been in discussions with the Japanese rugby union about a potential return to coach the Brave Blossoms. Um, and of course, this is in the backdrop of Australia's disastrous rugby union campaign in the World Cup. Disastrous group stage, don't get out the group stage. Defeats, record defeat to Wales, the defeat to Fiji, the struggling performances against Georgia and Portugal. Um, Inexperienced side. He goes. He was given a 5-year contract. He barely lasted 9 months. Um, and now suddenly he's been announced as Japan's new head coach, replacing the guy who replaced him. So he's back in the role at Japan. Whether that benefits Japan or not is another thing, but it doesn't look good when considering only a couple of months ago in September, October, we're having discussions in the pool stages of the World Cup of allegedly Eddie Jones having discussions with the Japanese union, considering that he was in year one of a 5-year deal with Rugby Australia. And then the fallout of the Rugby World Cup for Australia has been immense. There's massive issues at board level. There's massive problems within the organisation, and it's bearing out on the field. Um, they're not the only sporting organisation in Australia to have board issues. The West Tigers in the NRL, um, Leo Hadjimentales and Justin Pascoe have gone. The whole board resigned en masse or were let go en masse. Shane Richardson has come in as interim CEO on a 4-member board for a 6-month interim period that may be extended. And of course, you've got Benji Marshall in his first full season as head coach, and you've got Robbie Farah as his assistant. And apparently, they've offered Jerome Luai a 5 million 4-year contract. They're trying to obviously rebuild the team. They've had back-to-back wooden spoons, and suddenly this week, massive shift with the boardroom. Other NRL news, obviously, Paul Kent, the NRL 360 host, was found not guilty of assault at the beginning of the week. Did a video on that, covered that topic to death. I knew something was up when my video where I did a sort of speculative kind of a what if video. Will he ever return to host the program again? 4 or 5 months ago, suddenly got a load of views. And then it was like, oh, he's been found not guilty. Looked into it. Now, what will be interesting if he does return, if he does return to the NRL 360 programming as a co-host, and if he does return to write full time for the Daily Telegraph, considering that while he was suspended, he was working part time for a funeral home as a limo driver. Um, he may consider taking the state of New South Wales to court over his legal costs, because you can do that. You can get the state to pay your legal costs if you won the case. So we shall see how that plays out. Um, and we'll see in a couple months' time whether he's back presenting on Fox Sports and writing for the Daily Telegraph. He's obviously gone from Triple M Radio. Obviously, some issues there with some clashes on air with Anthony Maroon and Mark Geyer, which went down quite poorly at the time. But with what's happened with his court case and what came out in court, with how it was actually impacting the issues surrounding his ex partner and himself, and their chaotic relationship, and some of the personal stuff that's come out where it was impacting him professionally, and there was an impact on his working life, and therefore um, the working relationships and friendships he would have had. I think that makes a lot of sense now. I did make when I made one of the videos when he was initially arrested. That I noticed that his on-screen demeanor, when his personal demeanor was becoming more frustrated, and you could see that he was more combative than his normal combative self, which is why he's on NRL 360. It was very, very noticeable that in the months and weeks leading up to his suspension, that there was clearly something going on away from the cameras and away from the news desk, and obviously that's all come out in court. We'll see if he decides to return to frontline journalism, or whether he does decide to move on from the media. But we'll see what happens there. Very interesting, reading and looking into it. But hey, we'll see, as I say, if he does return to presenting NRL 360 and writing full time for the Daily Telegraph. So there we go. What else? There's been quite a bit happening, really, actually, hasn't there? Quite a bit going on. Yeah, last week I did actually watch a Netflix series, Bad Sport. It's about several major. I think is it a 5 or 6 part? I can't remember. But it goes through several major sporting scandals that are quite well known. They start with the ASU basketball point shaving scandal of the early 90s, 1994, where there were spot fixing matches. And it works its way through. We look at the Calciopoli scandal in Italy, for example. And the final episode is the Hansi Cronje allegations, and his fall from grace in 2000, and therefore, and also leading up to his untimely death in 2002 in a plane crash. And what is interesting, the Hansi Cronje one, really, really was quite interesting. All the others, I mean, the Calciopoli one was the Italian match fixing and the corruption scandal was there's a lot of facts in there that are well known. The legal consequences of that are still ongoing, by the way, which is very, very interesting. But the Hansi Cronje one, there's a lot of rumours circulating that he may have been taking bribes and backhanders to spot fix and match fix elements of special, well, more likely spot fixing. I think it's match fixing and Hansi Cronje. If you look at it, he asked Herschel Gibbs to score less than 20 runs in a game. Herschel Gibbs in that game scored 76 or something. But how he was caught is very interesting. He was caught on a wiretap involved in a completely separate criminal investigation that the Indian Federal Police were, investigating. They were investigating an organised crime network. He just so happened to be in the room, picked up, and the only reason, this is the scary thing, the reason why they figured out who it was on the tape, this foreign English-speaking person with a very strange accent that could have been anywhere in the British Commonwealth. Anyway, the only reason they actually figured out who it was is the chief investigator who was in charge of this undercover police unit that were involved in this organised crime investigation. The only reason they caught him is the guy's kids, cricket fans, were watching the TV, and Hansi Cronje the day before had been giving an interview to Indian TV following a match in this one-day series that South Africa were playing against India at the time. And this guy had, the audio tapes playing in his tape recorder, and the kids go, "Dad, why is Hansi Cronje on your talking on your videotape?" And that's when it twigged that, hey, we've got an investigation here into you know uh, corruption within cricket by pure accident. It was a purely accidental pickup. Had Hansi Cronje met in a different room in that hotel, we may never have found out about what was going on within South African cricket in 2000. But the allegations are sort of hinting at that Hansi Cronje might have been taking backhanders and asking players to either bowl X amount of no balls or wides or score X amount of runs for some time, basic spot fixing. There's rumours that it goes back to 1994, 1995 with Hansi Cronje. So a good 5, 6 years of taking dirty money, basically, which then opens up the whole wider aspect of cricket and players fiddling the outcome of games uh, for betting patterns and stuff like that, more than just South Africa. Um, so there's a much the Bad Sport Netflix series is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. It is really worth a watch. Really is worth really is worth a watch. The really interesting episode is obviously to do with the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City with the figure skating pairs competition. That is absolutely that's an eye opener, and I remember that from obviously my teenage years, my youth. I was I think 12, 11, 12 at the time. So that's interesting. Major League Rugby has lost two teams, Toronto and New York, plus Atlanta has moved to LA, but nothing has been announced about that recently. I think Major League Rugby is at risk. I think a lot of sports are at risk with what's happened over the last few years financially. The fact they only had the one team in Canada, and obviously when you look at all the North American major leagues, they pay their salaries in US dollars, even if a team is based in Canada. So that's where the NHL and Major League Soccer, for example, have more Canadian teams than the other major leagues. And that's why it's harder for Canadian teams to sign talent. But it is concerning that the only Canadian team's gone. I mean, you look at the start of Major League Soccer, it went through a similar thing where the early years were punctuated by a fluctuation of teams. But is it at risk? Um, but I haven't actually been following Major League Rugby for the last couple of years since the pandemic. I was following it before the pandemic, but since the pandemic, I haven't followed it as religiously. I felt in the early years, the first couple of seasons, there was some real positive signs um, of growth, and things were going really well. And then the USA and Canada obviously both failed to qualify for this last World Cup we just had in France. So, um, but the club game is a mess, apart from in France and Japan. Apart from France and Japan, to a certain extent, Major League Rugby, because there's always expansion teams entering, like Miami, for example, is entering the league. So where one team fails, another team pops up. So I wouldn't say Major League Rugby is at risk as such, because the sport itself has grown massively in the US in the last 20 years, and Canada. It's always been strong in Canada for participation. So there's enough people playing the game and watching the game in North America to say that it will survive being played. But I do think the COVID pandemic disrupted the growth, the trajectory of the league. Um, but club rugby across the board is in a shambles. Even it's just the whole the structures of the sport, because it became professional so late on. Um, they're making a lot of, well, rugby especially, and then all the federations and unions are making a lot of mistakes in regards to the domestic club structures, the club game, and how the finances are structured and how things are working. And clearly, they're not. And this is across the board. Crowd numbers would tell you that it's not working. Club rugby is not working. Um, I think what's happened is time rugby union goes professional. Rugby league's been professional for a long time. Time rugby union goes professional. It's 1995. What happens in the 90s? European football explodes. And of course, we've just had the World Cup in the US. So, you know, the, the football really has become the global game. Um, yeah, but club rugby's a mess. The finances are a mess. The constant rule changes by World Rugby um, are not helping. There's too many rule changes every season. There's just too many rule changes. If I was to look at tape of a professional game, club game, let's say in 1995, maybe 1996, 97, sometime before the 2003 World Cup, anytime in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I was to watch tape of last season, or even the start of this season, you'd be looking at completely different games, two completely different games being played. Um, Now, on top of that, you have to look at Major League Rugby and the locations they've chosen, and again the finances of those cities, the actual economics of the cities in question. The US economy isn't necessarily doing so great in certain locations. There's a lot of social division, there's a lot of wealth disparity, and you've got to look at how much they're charging for tickets. You have to look how much they're charging for tickets. Um, I think I mean, to do a bit of research on the Vegas NRL series, I thought I'll look at what ticket prices actually are, and there's a lot of tickets going for $19. The bronze package, the gold package is 119, thereabouts to 180 odd. But you got to look how much they're charging for tickets to attend games. And I was watching another YouTuber who was doing like a rugby union slash rugby league road trip and trying to work out why we can't get over 100,000 fans at a club rugby game or be the code anymore, because that's the record for a club rugby game is 100. I think it was the rugby league at Odsal Challenge Cup final 1956, 101, 102,000. Um, so they're, they're, this guy is the channel's called Tackle Bags. He has a rugby league podcast anyway. Um, but he was trying to work out why um, we're not getting you know big crowds at club level anymore. Like, and there's got to be a lot of reasons for that. A lot of reasons. Apparently, Aaron was not allowing. Yeah, I think that's an absolute joke, considering that he was given special the rule. This is where we are going to see a continued exodus of players now, because the English game is financially buggered and more clubs are at risk. Um, they London Irish could have been saved by the RFU and the governing body. Honestly, I believe Wasps and Worcester could have been saved, but because the way rugby union's got its administration rules and financial rules, which is different to football, again the structures aren't working. The structures aren't working. But there were rumours linking him with rugby league in Australia, with the NRL and Super League as well. There were rumours, there were teams interested in talking to him. again in that time frame, he's decided just to sign the contract extension, which keeps him in France. Why would he want to leave? But I don't get this. He's playing in a league in a Six Nations nation, which is France. Um, I really think the RFU selection, much like Wales, so restrictive and so backwards. There's a reason why the club game cannot sustain players on those contracts. Um, and I think that's another problem why we're not seeing the crowds turning up the games. But there is an issue with attendance. There's a massive issue with attendance, and then there's also that stereotype that rugby union, especially, is a posh fans and a posh person's game, which isn't necessarily true. Um, so, you know, the problem is though, you look at the NRL in Australia and look at the amount of players who are playing rugby league in Australia, NRL level or reserve grade or New South Wales Cup, Queensland Cup, and in the lower grades. Look how many of them actually played union at some point. There's a lot, and they're swapping codes because they can get paid, and it is striking. I'm going to have to. Oh my back! I've been having issues with my back the last few weeks, so it's really uncomfortable for some reason to sit up without back support. Got to go to the doctor. It's fun. Ah, ah. Um, but yes, so the Arundel, signing on with Racing 92 doesn't surprise me. It gives him a bit of certainty. It locks him in. There's been several high-profile English players over the last decade or so who've had a handful of England caps, who had the ability to lock down positions. The Armitage brothers being a prime example. Again, both ex-London Irish players. Abandon, who was, I think, a Bristol player. He was a very, very good fullback. There's been several players who have felt that their playing futures are best suited by playing overseas, and it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. Why? Um, but I don't understand with the RFU. It's a brain dead policy. Look, rugby league you can play in the NRL for any club in the NRL still represent England or Great Britain or Scotland or Wales or Ireland. Football you can play overseas, still represent England, Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland. Um, I Cricket you can play wherever you want because you've got the IPL unless you're on a centralised contract, but you can still technically be eligible to play. Um, Ice hockey you can play anywhere you want, although most British players play in the UK, but some have played in Sweden and the Czech Republic and played in North America and still represented. So I do not understand the RFU's standing on this, where they're saying you have to play in England to be eligible for selection. Same with Wales. You have to play in Wales to be eligible for selection. The domestic game cannot sustain those players who are that elite level, international caliber players. Um, So yeah, I just think it's a backwards policy. So look at South Africa. There's a reason why South Africa are now the most successful nation at international level. It's because they allow their players to play wherever. They allow the Rassie Rasmus was like, we've got to scrap this domestic only policy. It's not working. We cannot sustain it financially with the lack of money that we have. Australia are starting to potentially look the same way, although they're still handing out these contracts to rugby league players. Um, Look, I think rugby as rugby union has completely mismanaged professionalism. It's completely mismanaged it, whereas rugby league has had its own flaws, but has been professional for longer. Not in the modern sense, but players have been paid to play since 1895. Um, the professionals we see it now is more of a 70s, 80s, 90s construct, but players have been paid, they have been compensated for playing since the beginning of rugby league. The modern professional aspect is, as I say, more 80s, 90s. The last 30, 40 years, it started to become more of a thing. But I just, the RFU is, and the Premiership, it's just, they're trying to ring fence the Premiership while clubs are going out of business because it's just not working. Not working. You cannot basically say in order to play for England you've got to play in England. It's just not sustainable. Um, Vancouver being a good selection for a Major League Rugby team. They have played internationals there for Canada um, in the past and sold a lot of tickets. Um, but it's a very expensive. The cost of living in Vancouver is ridiculous. It's a very expensive city to live in. It's you've got to look at it. There's a reason why Toronto and New York, for example, have lost their teams. They are expensive cities to live in North America. Very, very expensive. Your wages don't go as far. It's like where I live in the southeast. I'm living in a reasonably expensive area. 20 miles down the road, I can get a flat twice the size for the same money I'm paying. Yeah. So while rugby is very, very popular in Vancouver and British Columbia, it's very expensive. So to put a professional team there and then to charge ticket prices and then pay the players, because the players are going to have to find a place to live on those wages. And I'm not sure what Major League Rugby wages are like, but they're probably not a massive amount. Yeah. With Exeter and Newcastle at risk of going out of business, how will a seven? It won't be any good. Exeter, one of the best teams in the country for results. Again, watching the Tackle Bags YouTube channel, where he invited a rugby union friend. He's a rugby league fan. He invited a friend who's a rugby union fan, and it was £47 per ticket for the terrace, and their average attendance has fallen off a cliff. Their average attendance was 12 to 13,000. It's now dropping to around 8,000, 6 to 8,000. So they've lost a lot of average attendance. It's just gone. That's a loss, which explains why the ticket prices had to go up, which is putting fans off going. Newcastle, yeah, I mean, the RFU have really bollocks things up in regards to sorting out loans and grants through the COVID pandemic. You know, clearly the attendances aren't good enough across the board. The way the salary cap was just flagrantly breached by Saracens and Leicester, and other teams have overspent. I would think Bristol are overspending, but they've got a different ownership structure. Because Bristol City Football Club is part of the same sports group. So Bristol have it, but Bath have been struggling on the field because the Premiership's ring fence. They don't get relegated, so you can be a really, really fit team and not face the prospect of getting relegated. Now you can just be shit. But no, they've really, because you've lost the revenue of Wasps of Worcester and London Irish for extra fixtures. You've lost that revenue. You've lost those rivalries. It's just a mess. But no, Exeter charging £47 a ticket because their average attendance has dropped. So they've got to make that revenue up. That was last season. Don't know about this season. That in this current economic climate, that is not sustainable. And while Exeter's got a very vibrant economy as a city, as does Newcastle, when you go outside of those cities into the surrounding area, the average salaries don't go very far, and they're not areas of the country which have a lot of jobs. The West Country and the Northeast, there's a lot of unemployment. Um, yeah, I think Sale's got issues with their ground as well. The whole thing has been really badly governed. Really badly governed. Professionalism is not working properly. Um, there's we have to then look at the TV deal. We have to look at um, the insistence of the RFUs, stating that to represent England, play in England. I mean, we have to look at Wales again. We have to look at Wales again. Apart from, let's say, a player under a certain age can play over outside of Wales, because Reece Samet plays for Gloucester, for example. Um, but the insistence from the Welsh Union of you have to play in Wales, which is why they took a really inexperienced side to the World Cup, I felt, and they overachieved. But possibly because Australia were that bad in their pool. Um, yeah, football tickets. Yeah, look, some of the prices being charged for some is just unacceptable. But team owners don't care. There's there has to come a point where fans start boycotting. Unfortunately, some fan bases are too loyal, and it's almost on a fanatical religious level of loyalty. Clubs like Newcastle, like Liverpool, you will barely see an empty seat. Doesn't matter how good or bad the team is playing. Manchester United, you barely see an empty seat. The team is all over the place. Chelsea, some of these clubs, fans continue to Swindon Town have got off-field issues. Things aren't going great at Swindon Town. Things aren't going great at Reading. Things aren't going great at a lot of clubs. From the Premier League, where clubs are under investigation, to Everton potentially having another points deduction, to through the Football League into the non-league pyramid, there's a lot of problems. So it's not all roses. And yeah, look, Swindon Town, I mean, they can't justify, saying you've got to pay more than 20 quid a ticket. They're in the lower levels of the Football League. But football finances are a mess. Ticket prices are a mess. Yeah, Fulham's season ticket price is ridiculous, and that prices out a lot of fans. I've got a few. My brother-in-law's a Fulham fan. He lives obviously with my sister up the road, not a million miles away from me, outside of London. Couple of my friends are Fulham fans, and guess what? They're not wealthy individuals, so for them to go see a game is a rarity. I say that with love, but they can't afford to go from, oh, but it's the prawn sandwich home county brigade, like fans of Chelsea and Arsenal and all that, all the home. Just because of the home counties doesn't mean we're all wealthy. People have this perception, this stereotype that the southeast is all really wealthy and everyone has really good wages. Not the case. For my friend Steve is a Chelsea fan, and he went into London. This is before COVID, to watch Chelsea game, and for one ticket and to get accommodation, we had to park the car for the night, get accommodation just for the ticket, accommodation, so a cheap hotel, and overnight secure parking for his car, where he could actually get a parking space, was nearly £500 himself. That's not including food and drink. But £3,000 for a season ticket, I don't know how they can justify that, because it's not as if Fulham are, making European finals and competing for top four finishes. They're just a mid-table club at best. In fact, they're a yo-yo club at the moment. They have made a European final, obviously, in their history, but they're a yo-yo club at best. 3,000. I mean, that is ridiculous. Ridiculous. But then you look at the ownership change since Mohammed Al Fayed to the Saeed Khan era. Yeah, there is no comparison. You look at who's running the club now, and look at how the Jacksonville Jaguars are run, and AEW, the wrestling promotion. Yeah, it's American owners. You know, um, they try and milk the fan base for everything they're worth. Um, but yeah, obviously a lot of fans do live in Hammersmith and Fulham, so they are local and they do have a bit of disposable income. But there are fans of Fulham who live outside of Fulham, surprisingly enough. There are fans of Chelsea that don't live in Chelsea, surprisingly enough. And not all those fans have a lot of disposable income. Um, and but fans continue to pay for this. And then you look at the player wages and the transfers and agents' fees. It starts to make you wonder um, how much revenue they actually make from match day and season ticket sales, because the TV deal is worth a ridiculous amount of money. We know that, but how much of the revenue streams actually come from ticket sales? Because I would argue that the financial structures and how the sport is right now is not sustainable. There's no way that these clubs are making money, um, or, because of there's a lot of clubs that are in debt. There's money being spent that they don't have, like balancing the transfer payments over 5 years or something. They've changed the rules now when it comes to transfers. You're only allowed to have payments over 5 years. Why can't they pay outright? Here's the transfer, it's done. Mad. They're spending money they don't have, which is why some clubs are in financial difficulties. They haven't been fully paid the money they are owed on transfers. Um, Team USA basketball team are playing a couple of Olympic Games, warm-up games in the O2 next year. Tickets are hundreds of pounds. I'm sure they'll sell. It's just how is that justifiable? Like how who comes up with these? Uh, but yeah, no, there are people who will buy that. There are people who will buy things, and it's like um, I was, there's been a lot of discussion about attendance at certain sports teams and certain leagues and how these teams aren't drawing very well, and economics has a large part to do with it. Now, I'm a Winnipeg Jets fan in the NHL, and apparently they're 4,000 tickets down sales because until recently they were over capacity, so there was actually not enough tickets to go around. There was a queue to get tickets. There was always sold out plus thousands of people waiting to get into the arena to even be able to get tickets for a game. Now they've sold 4,000 less tickets per game, so their attendance is down by 4,000. Yeah, they're one of the best teams in the league right now on results and where they're in the standings. So the team's playing really well. Fans aren't turning up. It's economics. You know, rich Americans living in London, then it's not really growing the sport then to new fans. Um, but the O2 is always expensive. The former Millennium Dome, that that building made a loss when they built it. To maintain it costs a lot of money. It was going to be a temporary structure, now become a permanent structure. It's a 24-year-old building that was meant to last a handful of years and then been taken down 20 odd years ago. The maintenance on the building costs a lot. It's regularly been criticised for prices of tickets for events there. While it is on the Jubilee line, it's in a part of Greater London that really doesn't have the best transport links apart from the Jubilee line. Um, yeah, no, it's a vanity. It's those. It's just it's basically a lot of basketball fans are from working class minority backgrounds. They're from the Afro Caribbean community. Um, they're from the Asian community, for example, in inner city London and inner city Birmingham and inner city Manchester, and, and even white working class kids. It's a working class sport. So the people who play and watch basketball and are massive fans of it are from very poor backgrounds and poor demographics economically. You tell me who can afford 112, 120 quid for a ticket when they can't even afford to pay their council tax or pay the heating bill. That's not going to grow the sport. Like when people are using food banks, that is ridiculous. How that is, but it's the O2. The O2 is a very. It doesn't matter if there's a concert at the O2 or you know, basketball or whatever's happening at the O2. It's a very, very expensive place to go because the O2 is obviously wanting the arena, what was the Millennium Dome. They want to, the operators of that want to make some money. Then, of course, the players have got to get paid, the federations have got to get paid. So, out of those ticket sales, you've got to then split up where the money goes. And I don't know about the NBA Players Association and what they've agreed for when players represent in their teams internationally, be it the US, Canada, and all the European and overseas nations. But there would be an agreement in there where they get a match fee for internationals. Um, but how that grows the sport, I don't know. I don't know. I remember YouTuber Nin Lee. I can know Niahly saying refusing to go to London series because of the ticket prices. What London series are we talking about? We're talking about NFL. We're talking about Major League Baseball. Because when I looked into Major League Baseball, I looked at the ticket prices for Major League Baseball this summer. The cheapest tickets I could find were £39 or something, or sort of 39 to 50 odd quid. Um, and the upper end ticket prices, some of them, I looked on some resale sites and we're looking at £1,000, and I was like, that is ridiculous. That is ridiculous. And then obviously I've been looking at the NRL ticket prices. I don't know if these are in American or Australian dollars, but the cheapest ones are $19. Far, far, far more um, sustainably priced. The baseball ones, I can't remember. I looked obviously. Was it the 2019 series? The ticket price was hammered online. A lot of people were like, "This is ridiculous. I'm not paying this." And they were Major League Baseball were criticised. But then you've got to look at well, the London Stadium. They've obviously got to reconfigure the ground, which cost a lot of millions. I think it was 5 million at the time. But yeah, I noticed that there was empty seats in both games. People leaving early. The time of day. I mean, I have to admit, this year the Major League Baseball series was some of the hottest days of the year. I will admit that it was high humidity, thunderstorms floating around. It was mid 30s degrees Celsius. Not as hot as last year. I was sat in my flat watching them. I was literally in my boxers and a tank top. I was melting. And my flat, while it is south facing, is in the shade because of the tall trees. The humidity was ridiculous. I had condensation just from the sheer humidity on the inside of my window. I was just drowning. Um, yeah, hey man, what do you think? London series flopped so hard in the summer. It seemed to be a huge lack of effort. I think it. Yeah, I only saw one advert. Um, I only saw one advert. I don't know what the TV viewership figures were like. I think that the fan turnout. I don't think they were full sellouts. There were empty seats. They were visible. Fans were leaving early. Now the first game was a bit of a blowout, which I think didn't help. The second game was a lot closer, which I think did help. The lack of home runs. I think that I don't time of day maybe, but I saw one advert. In 2019, you had Jimmy Carr being like British face of trying to push the product. Jimmy Carr is possibly one of the most controversial and divisive comedians in this country. I'm not a fan of Jimmy Carr, but then again, I'm not a massive fan of baseball. However, I forced myself to sit through two baseball games in full without getting up, without going to the toilet, without eating any food. I felt that the broadcasting side of it, I think getting Jimmy Anderson as a cricket player into the broadcast booth was a win because that's a similar sport where there's a bit of crossover of skills. Um, and of course, Jimmy Anderson is the greatest fast bowler in all time of cricket. Games wicket taking average is lower than McGrath and Stuart Broad, but he's got more Test wickets and is still a Test player, even though he's 41, 42. I think there was a lack of advertisement, and of course, quite regularly I get public transport. I don't drive anymore. Well, I don't ride anymore. I had obviously a very for those who follow the channel for longer, I had a very serious couple of serious motorcycle accidents, and I got rid of my little Honda, and so now when I go anywhere, I go by train. And yeah, in the build up, I I'm on the train. I'm not seeing any billboards. I'm not seeing any advertisements at stations because that's where the billboards are. Um, and of course, trains in and out of London, you'll have these London events, like go to this event in London or this event where the rail line in the catchment area of the train company. And yeah, there just wasn't. I saw one advert on YouTube. I wouldn't say it completely flopped. I don't know what the TV viewership was like on the bit. I do not know what the internet and TV viewership was like over here. I don't know what the viewership was like over in the US either. I can't comment on that. I haven't seen those figures released yet. I haven't found them. They're probably out in the public domain, the viewership figures for the London series, but I've seen a few adverts popping up for next year's series for all the international games, not just London. Um, and I don't know. Uh, you went to the Yankees and Red Sox London series, which was heavily advertised. Was advertised more? Yes, there was more money available in the economy to advertise as well. Bear that in mind. And I said on the day you went, maybe it's because they were bigger, well brands. You could argue that. You could argue the Dodgers, another big one. But you've got to look at what's happened since the first London games and the second batch of London games in Major League Baseball. We've had the sign stealing scandal. We've had the obviously the shutdown and play of Major League Baseball during COVID. Then we had the resumption of play talks that were very, very fraught with players threatening to go on strike and the constant delays in getting Major League Baseball up and running again in 2020, 2021. And then we had the lockout. There's been a lot of negative headlines coming out of Major League Baseball. And now first series since the lockout. Yeah, uh, well, Ninley is brilliant. I've watched a few of his videos. I think there are ways he could potentially improve, but there are ways that I think he does quite well. He does use a lot of graphics, doing it a long time. But when someone who's that invested in, in sport is saying I'm not going to these games. The prices are too much. I think they got the ticket prices better this time round than previously. I think there was a good adjustment where they were actually more reasonably priced. Although, as I say, looking on resale sites, some of these tickets were going over £1,000. Again, every time I saw fans interviewed, they always seem to be American fans who have gone over to London as tourists. So, does that actually benefit the domestic audience? No. You want to see as many locals as possible, or many local residents, because there will be a large. There is a large. There's over two. There's There's over 300,000 Americans, US citizens living in the UK. Now, a lot of them are military personnel based at the Air Force bases. And of course, there's a lot of people over here who were here because of the tech industry around Cambridgeshire, um, the tech industry around the Thames Valley, where I live, and in the major cities such as Leeds, which is the second banking centre of the UK, the second biggest banking sector, Manchester, and of course London. And there's quite a few up in Scotland and in other major cities as well. There's a big US population over here, a third of a million. Um, I would say, I would say, what I think for me, the issue I think with was the start times. Public transport, especially on a Sunday, is a sham, which is probably why a lot of people were leaving early. There's been obviously a lot of industrial action on trains and buses and strikes, overpaying conditions that have rumbled on for the best part of a year and a half. Trust me, I know about strikes. It's really, really disrupted, um, my weekends. Um, so they could look at start times, maybe starting the Saturday games that little bit earlier, because I think where it works for Major League Baseball doing it when they do is rugby union and football. It's the off season. Nothing's happening. Club teams aren't playing. Now the issue they are going to have for TV audience is the Euros takes place next summer in Germany. Now that's going to draw a lot of eyes, not just in Europe but globally, onto that tournament. Um, but public transport is, a bit of a problem. Um, and also, is it the best stadium in London to potentially? I would say that they originally, when they were coming up with the idea of taking games to London, they wanted to use the Oval, which is actually, ironically, the best stadium in London for connectivity. It's right by Vauxhall Underground Station and Vauxhall Mainline Station. It is possibly the best stadium to use for the baseball series. It is smaller than the London Stadium, so the crowd will be smaller, but it's more accessible and it's right in the centre of London. Whereas the London Stadium is further out into the borough of Newham, whereas Vauxhall was in the borough of Lambeth, which Southwark. Is it Southwark? It's just south of the River Thames. It's not that far from Audley Station. It's right in the centre of London, near enough. It's just outside the centre of London, whereas the City Stadium is further out. While there's been a lot of work done with Stratford International and overground London Underground and the mainline services to get there, the Oval's still a much easier venue to get to, much easier, so much easier to get to, and is even easier if you are an overseas fan to get to Heathrow and Gatwick, much easier to get to. And initially they were going to use the Oval. Of course, the Cricket World Cup was taking place back in 2019, and clash. And so they decided to go with the bigger stadium, which means you can sell more tickets, which means ticket prices, ironically, will be less. But it costs more to reconfigure the playing surface. So um, I'm interested to see if the 2028 Euros goes like any transport security problems. No, it won't. Let's be honest, it won't. Let's not kid ourselves, please. Be honest here. Although Germany, they are. I have heard reports, and I don't know if it's just Gelsenkirchen, but they're going to be alcohol free in stadiums and surrounding stadium areas in Gelsenkirchen. Whether that's all the German cities in next year, we should wait to see. But England Serbia is going to be an alcohol free game in the stadium, but that doesn't stop fans from getting utterly tanked at their hotels and B&Bs and campsites or wherever they're staying, piling in at the stadium already drunk. So that's going to be interesting how that plays out. If they're trying to push baseball in the UK, they need a huge marketing budget until it retakes off. They have the money to fund marketing campaign. Yeah, Major League Baseball does have the money. All the major pro leagues in the US and Canada have the money. um, to really push. Push the product. Just look what the NRL have done in just a couple of weeks in Vegas, with a few months in Vegas since they launched ticket sales. They've already basically sold out both games with 3 months to spare. And they went. It doesn't take much to get an advert out there, be it online or on TV or on the radio, whatever, or in print media. Doesn't matter how you get the advert out there or the adverts. You can do it on a cheap budget and really just go spam it, which is what the NRL, their advert did not cost a lot of money to make. Let's be honest. Did not take a lot of effort to make that advert. They just threw it out there. Yeah. So Gelsenkirchen's police chief has said it's going to be around in and around the stadium, which is Schalke Stadium, by the way. It's going to be a dry zone. Going to be no drinking allowed in the stadium or within X amount of kilometres surrounding the stadium or something. They're going to put an alcohol ban in place. Now, whether they do that they can't do that in Berlin, surely, or Munich. That would be a disaster because all the barkeepers be like, we've lost thousands and thousands of euros worth of trade on that day. Why? We shall see if there's an announcement by UEFA and before the tournament. Nothing overly official. It just sounds like Gelsenkirchen learned from 2006. Obviously, there were some issues with disorder, not just involving England fans, but Germany, Poland. That there was the famous Battle of Dortmund that lasted 16 hours in Dortmund city centre, and in and around the ground. There were some incidents in 2006, the World Cup. Switzerland and Austria in 2008, again, there were some incidents, but England weren't there. But there were some incidents with certain fan bases clashing. It's not just an England or British disease, let's just make that very, very clear. And of course, they've looked at footage of previous tournaments, and they've looked and seen how Qatar obviously had dedicated fan zones where you were limited to the amount of alcohol. And then, of course, you had the hotel and resort areas where obviously rules are different, but then in public spaces outside of those dedicated areas, alcohol, you're caught with it, you are in trouble. And they've clearly looked at that from last year. And they've looked at the last Euros where there were a lot of issues in certain locations, but there were also restrictions on fans in stadiums in certain cities because it was COVID impacted. And so they also looked at the women's Euros, obviously last year. That was a great success. And they've obviously looked at various things that are good and bad, and they've looked at previous tournaments that they themselves have hosted, previous sporting events they have hosted, and they've decided, Gelsenkirchen at least, that's the policy they're going to pursue. Now, whether the rest of the venues and UEFA goes this and German federal police negotiate with, obviously, UEFA and say, oh, this is what we want, this may reduce issues for our officers to deal with. I wouldn't want to disagree with the German federal police, by the way. Just wouldn't want to do it. Yeah. Fan zone is good, but where are you going to stick a fan zone in Wembley? Yeah. Wembley's just... You could have a fan zone like Trafalgar Square. You could have a fan zone, somewhere else. In a very centralized location where you can control entrances and exits to that square or that park or central location where you can really have good policing and security presence, and you can control access in and out. Sounds a bit draconian, but it's how major events are policed and security, is done. They've done fan zones during the 2018 World Cup. I remember they had big screens. Almost every town and city in the country put a big screen up. And they did it in certain areas of town and city centres. And they went, oh, this is the dedicated big screen. This is the dedicated fan zone. Alcohol will be limited in this fan zone, for example. But that doesn't stop those who like a bevy from drinking before the match and after the match in areas outside of that exclusion zone. does not prevent it at all. While it has some impact in and around the stadium in a controlled environment, outside of that environment, outside of that area, however they decide to do it in Gelsenkirchen, which we're going to use as the example because he's publicly come out and said it's an alcohol. We've decided operationally this is what we're going to do. I don't know how it works. It's like the Olympic Stadium in Berlin or the T-Mobile Arena in Munich, for example. I don't know how, or the Allianz Arena as it is now. I can't remember if it's Allianz or T-Mobile, but how they're going to do it. And then you've got to think of the local, restaurant and bar owners going, we're losing a lot of money here because they could be in an exclusion zone, and then they're like, well, we can't operate as we would normally. Problem with the UK in regards to is the police aren't aggressive enough towards the perpetrators. Oh no, the police here are in a bit of a. I don't want to get onto policing and the issues surrounding the right to protest and peace because there's protests today about the war in the Middle East, and all that. But you go to other countries and oh god, putting alcohol bans in the Czech Republic and Slovakia around like if there was a joint tournament between the Czech Republic and Slovakia, and if they were hosting, yeah, I think there'll be resistance to having alcohol-free zones because again, the amount of trade that would be lost by hotels, restaurants, and bars that would necessarily could be in an exclusion zone on a match day would. I wouldn't say the UK police are a soft bunch. I just think there's a lot of issues with the Home Office, the government, policing, and then the public perception of policing. I think things are going wrong, but that's a social issue that's got. in this conversation, we're discussing about a police chief in a city going, we're having our alcohol exclusion zone. A lot of cities have alcohol exclusion zones in public outside licensed premises where you can't be seen drinking in public. So, how that would impact local pubs, restaurants, and bars in Germany next summit in Gelsenkirchen, we'll use that as an example. There's going to be some pushback. There will be pushback. And as I say, every major sporting tournament or Olympic Games or World Championships, World Cups, Euros, whatever it may be, there's some positives and there's always some negatives. It never goes off without a hitch. There's always some critique. There's always something that comes up which is controversial. In this case, I'm not for or against it. I think it doesn't solve the problem that there's going to be disorder before and after games and during games. I think that's still going to occur. There will still be issues, but I think the German police are looking at it from the Euros final a couple of years ago. They're looking at it from how Qatar did have those dedicated public areas where fans can go. Outside of those areas, no alcohol. You'll be arrested, you'll be fined, you'll be spending a night in a Qatari prison cell, which is not particularly pleasant, I can probably assure you that. And there was very little disorder. It seemed to work, but that's, again, culturally, it's like that. Germany's different. Germany does have that beer keller, which is the term, culture, the beer hall culture, which is a social aspect of neighbourhoods. Every town, every village will have a beer hall or beer halls. It's a cultural thing. It's most of the Alps, and it has these kind of beer hall kind of cultures, much like the English pub culture, the British pub culture, where every village, every town has that pub on the street corner, or used to, or the pub on the high street, or the pub down by the fishing pool with the fish, that kind of thing. That community aspect where it's not about getting absolutely rat-assed, it's just about, we can have lunch here as well, you can spend the night, rent a room for the night as a traveller's in. That kind of hotel type bar beer, it's a cultural thing. And if you're going to put these exclusion zones in place, you're either going to have a lot of people piling in quite quickly, Um, no, I think that the police in England, I think they'll just get the video cameras out and try and prosecute later, whilst they're pummeling each other. I think there's been a directive. There's been a directive from um, higher up in regards to this. I also think they give a bit more leeway in Europe to police command in regards to major sporting events and major political events, social events, where they give a bit more security, flexibility. Now, this will be there how they operate. I don't know. I mean, every major tournament, there'll be police forces will negotiate with each other, liaise with each other. They'll send officers over. Um, they'll try and spot troublemakers. They'll say, "Oh, well, this guy's on our watch list." Um, they'll try and prevent those who are on a banned list or a watch list from attending matches and attending events. Um, the, I wouldn't say our police are completely useless, but I do think at the moment there's this perception that the police there's been a lot of negative headlines surrounding police corruption, and have gone to prison. Um, and there's a lot of negativity with a lot of incidents over the last few years where that has created a lot of discussion socially. I wouldn't say our coppers are completely a soft punch, um, but I would say that there is a lot going around on social media where the police are not performing uh, on a level where they should. There's one where there's a guy going sees a police car parked. There's a robbery taking place and there's a punch up. There's a couple of incidents outside a supermarket. There's an assault and they don't do anything, doing the rounds. You know, there is an issue with how the public are perceiving certain certain aspects. But I'm sure in Germany there was a debate about policing powers and police corruption, and it's the same arguments are being had over there. Going, well, maybe they're too strict, maybe they're too um, aggressive when it comes to crowd, keeping order at big events. So you can't win. But it is interesting that the police commander in Gelsenkirchen in Germany has said it's going to be a dry. I don't know how the. I mean, UEFA might say and have agreement with um, the various police commanders, and they may actually have discussions where they go, right, all stadiums are dry zones. That may be a UEFA policy, um, for this tournament. We shall see. But you know, as I say, no major sporting event is always perfect. There's always going to be some aspect that we, as fans or in general, are going to criticise. There's always going to be an aspect that is criticised when we look at it. And in this case, I'm not for or against this because I don't think it does stop fans charging into bars 3-4 hours before kickoff, um, and then creating problems later. Who wins on current form? I think it's too close to call. I honestly think this is going to be too close to call. I think we're going to have a lot of surprises next summer. There are a lot of teams that always do well in qualifiers, always qualify at a breeze, and then seem to lose a bit of momentum in the tournament. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Gareth Southgate in England and selections. A lot of pressure. I think Germany, with how they performed in the last couple of tournaments, last three tournaments, are under a lot of pressure as hosts as well. They've got to get out the group stage and they've got to progress far into the tournament. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of questions about towards the German FA, the structures, selections and why players are and why the team isn't performing very well, because they fell out the group stage 2018 the World Cup. Euros they were poor, and the last World Cup again fell flat on their faces. That's 3 tournaments in a row where they haven't really done much and looked anything like they did when they were beating Brazil 7-1 in Brazil in that semi-final, and just toying with them and consistently making the knockout stages of tournaments for decades. Not the same team. So Germany, Italy as holders, with how they failed to qualify for the last World Cup, pressures on them. So how Spain are going to play with everything that's happened with their football association and all the issues in Spanish football. I do think we are potentially going to have a very, very open tournament. And we could see some shocks. We could see another Greece, for example, in 2004 going all the way to the final and winning. We could see an underdog just go on a run, get some momentum, and there's no pressure on them. They're not expected to do anything, and they go on and win the whole thing. There are other nations where there's a lot of pressure, and Southgate with England is under pressure. The expectation is there now, with a slightly disappointing end to our World Cup last year. Yeah, rightly so. Euro 2004 was my favourite. I think Euro 96 was my favourite tournament for me. And I did enjoy France 98 as well. I felt they were 2 very, very good tournaments, but I've been watching football since 1992, since I could just about walk. I think in 92 I was just about starting to walk. So, and I vaguely remember 1 or 2 moments from Euro 92. Not a lot, but USA 94 was the tournament I started really understanding what was going on, and was allowed to stay up late and watch the games. I was still technically at nursery, I think. So my mum was on half days at the department store she worked at. So there were some days I didn't have to go to nursery because my mum was part time at work at the time, because my dad was still in the army and my parents were still married. But I was allowed to stay up and watch a lot of the USA 94 games because it was in summer, and my mum took some time off work, I think. Euro 96, watched that religiously, and quite fondly. And of course, then World Cup 98, that game against Argentina, and Michael Owen's wonder goal, and then what happens in that game, Beckham being sent off and all, and the aftermath of that performance. And then obviously, Euro 2000, England and Germany both failed to get out of the group. Portugal and Romania were the teams that got out of the group that year. And England beat Germany in Charleroi 1-0 with an Alan Shearer penalty. So that was Germany's low point. I think we're at a lower point with Germany now than in Euro 2000. I think there's several sides that I think it's very open. I do think at this point, Euro 2024 is potentially a more open tournament than the last one. I think it would be interesting to look at goals per game average, and that's something I rarely do advanced stats videos, and I used to get the whiteboard out back in the day. But the way my current apartment or flat, depending where you are in the world, is laid out with the lighting, the natural lighting and the actual lighting, I would have to do a lot of reconfiguring of my apartment, and I don't want to do that because I've got too much stuff to move around, and it would just be too stressful. But I used to get the whiteboard out, and I used to get some stats on the board, and points per game, goals per game, and shots per game average, and saves. It will be interesting to look at goals per game average at tournaments in my lifetime. So I'm going from Italian 90, I'll be looking at going forwards. And that would be very, very interesting to look at tournament football. And then look at domestic league football as well, because I did look at, there's a website that actually covers the Premier League goals per game average. I actually went through this with a friend of mine at work, my friend Jake. And it stays between a certain band. It doesn't really massively spike and go up and down. There's one season where it drops to 1.91, and there's one season where it goes up to 3.875 or something. But for the most part, it's between 2.5 and 3.5 goals a game, average, consistently, not really fluctuating that much. But I do think it does seem to me that there's more goals per game now. We saw at what World Cup was it? It was the 2018 World Cup, I believe, and there was only was it one game where there were no goals. Every other game had goals in 2018. I think it was Denmark France was the 0-0. So there was only one game which was goalless in that entire tournament, which I thought was very, very interesting. So for me, I think goals per game is up from where it was in the 90s. I think it's higher now than when it was in the 90s. I think there's been some dips in there as well, but it'll be very interesting to actually look at goals per game average and see where each tournament sort of is at. But that will be fun to do. But that's I'm not the best at maths, but I know there's websites out there that track this and track shots per game average and saves per game average and shots on target as well. So actual creating chances, possession stats. There's all these advanced analytics, which I keep an eye on them, but I don't religiously follow advanced analytics, and I don't like when teams are structured and built around just advanced analytics alone because it doesn't team chemistry is something else. France had a successful rugby league tour of Kenya recently. They won the series 2-0. Kenya is still a long way to go to be better, but to be fair, yeah, we rarely see now teams going on a long tour. We don't see these. The 80s and the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where a team would go on a 3-month tour, so Australia to Europe, for example, Great Britain to Australia and New Zealand, or France going on. They don't happen like they used to. But fair play to France for doing that. There's obviously a lot of issues with international rugby league. We know following the Rugby League World Cup a couple of years ago that there's an issue with attendance at games. There's an issue with the best teams, the golfing class between teams. It's not as close, and obviously the international calendar and structures going forward. We don't know where the 2026 World Cup is going to be hosted. It's going to be New Zealand, but hasn't been confirmed. There's a lot of issues at play. So it is a wait and see. It is a wait and see. We do have to see how it pans out. But fair play to France for touring a developing nation and deciding what, we are going to go on tour and we are going to get some international games under our belts. That's more experience for the players. And fair play to Kenya for agreeing, knowing that they're going to get battered. For agreeing, even though, because they've got to develop, they've got to improve, and they want to take that next step where they're trying to qualify for a World Cup in years to come. I think they played South Africa in a couple of tests, and South Africa won as well. So fair play to Kenya for fully realising that they're not going to win these games. And again, South Africa putting a team together is fantastic. They haven't been at a Rugby League World Cup since I think 2000. And fair play for France for taking matches there and deciding to do a test series and try and grow the game in a non-traditional location. I think that's a positive. But Kenya does have a very good rugby sevens program and a very good rugby union program, so it's not as if they don't play with the oval ball. Kenya also has a very good cricket program as well, and is developing in other sports other than track and long distance athletics. So Kenya is an underrated and undervalued sport location. There are a lot of athletes do altitude training there because of the Rift Valley, and obviously they're famed for their long distance track and field athletes and marathon runners and cross country runners but they do have a good cricket program. They do have a rugby union program, and now obviously they have a developing rugby league program. They also obviously have the national football side. Do I still follow the English ice hockey leagues frequently? Not as much as I used to, because I've obviously moved a few times. Haven't been to games since before the pandemic. I just do not have the spare cash to go to games at the moment. I've been invited to a few games. I just do not have the money. Do not have the money. And my friend Rob, I mean, we've been discussing it, but he's a single parent. He has his two twin girls. He's a single parent. He's a stay-at-home dad at the moment. He works from home, but he's a stay-at-home dad. He's got other kids as well, but he's a single dad. And to obviously sort out childcare on a weekend is difficult, especially when they both had health issues as well. That is difficult, and it's also difficult when it is. It is. I mean, I look at it and I go, the owners, and I have since found out a bit of information about you know the ownership group, and there was some dodginess financially going on, and they're not the only uh, sports. There's a lot of dodginess financially in sports. No, look, the local council can go and do one. There's a lot of issues with local governance. I mean, I now live in the next borough down, and hey, you know, I found out a bit of stuff about Showcase Cinema, for example, and how some dodginess went on there with the planning. But look, the the same was happening in Basingstoke. The same as the Glasgow with the Glasgow Clouding playing the Elite League, the SSE Arena. I think it is. Is it the SSE? Scottish and Southern League. The arena operators of that went into administration. You've got the issues on the Isle of Wight. This is not a new issue for ice hockey teams in this country. There's a reason, and it's not just an issue just for the UK. I mean, you look at in the NHL, several teams have got arena problems, and people go, "Oh, it's Arizona." They're going to announce their plot of land in the Phoenix metro area in the next coming days, weeks. They're going to have a new arena. But Planet Ice is an operator. They're trying to gain a monopoly. Actually, they're trying to gain a monopoly so they can control the industry. They can control, you know, the ice rink industry, basically that entertainment venue. And that's a problem with local councils not having the money to operate sports facilities. They're trying to offload them or get another company in to manage them on their behalf, to subcontract them. So everyone active, for example, runs the Slough Ring. And if, you know, oh look, Planet Ice is a shocking company. But they nearly at one point bought the Bracknell Ice Rink. The John Knight Group have been trying to flog that land for 15, 20 years. And I think Planet Ice is a hit and miss with them. Some of their arenas are fantastic. Some of them are really in a shock. It's just they're trying to gain a monopoly where they can do whatever they want. Local councils just don't have the money. They just don't have the money, and but it's not just a UK problem. You look at North America. Calgary's got an issue. Arizona's got an issue. The Washington Capitals are planning a new arena. The Ottawa Senators are planning a new arena. It's not just it's vacant. It's just an empty brownfield site. It's derelict. I drive past it multiple times a week because of my job. It's there. Nothing's happened to it. Like it's still a massive hole in the ground at one point. The ski slope with the ski lifts is still there. It is just derelict. No activities taking place. There's still some structures still standing from the whole complex, especially on the ski slope side of things. Um, but even then, they shouldn't have even built the ice rink on there because it was an old brickworks. So they didn't even properly decontaminate the previous site. They got the land cheap for a reason. Um, that it's yeah, it's derelict. There's just a gap where the ice rink used to be. Good morning. I'd watch the on stream, but I'm off Portman Road very, very soon. Any score prediction? I have to admit, Ipswich are doing quite well this season. I'm really surprised with how Ipswich are doing. I wouldn't be surprised if they put. I would say Ipswich are going to score at least 3 goals. I need something about. I read something about the proposal for the land would cost in excess of 30 million, making it not profitable by build on. No, brownfield sites are generally cheaper than greenfield sites. They generally sell for cheaper. Um, they generally sell for cheaper. And the thing is, all the utilities would already be connected for electric, drainage, sewage. You just have to reorganise them a little bit. It's already on the power grid, so I don't know. I honestly don't know what's going to happen with it at all. It's just derelict wasteland. But there were other areas of derelict wasteland that are now being built on. They're now building a new housing estate around the corner. They've sold some more land off, which um, if they want to build houses, I could. Well, you look at the Docklands in London. I don't want to get off a sporting topic here, but you look at the Docklands in London, where they built Canary Wharf and they built these high-rise, office and apartment blocks. The redevelopment started there in the. If you watch the film The Long Good Friday with Bob Hoskins and Helen Mirren, very attractive young Helen Mirren, by the way, in 1979, that's filmed on the Docklands. And then if you watch Full Metal Jacket, ironically set in Vietnam, but actually filmed in the Docklands, they were allowed to do so cheaply because there was a lot of derelict buildings and there was a lot of wasteland that wasn't doing anything. And so they were allowed to do all these stunts and explosions and blow stuff up, and they didn't care because they were going to demo all these old factories, all these old warehouses, and all these old units and docks that were unusable. They were old. And the Docklands development is still going on. So the Isle of Dogs and all these high-rise buildings are going up year on year, and that's been happening since the late 80s, early 90s. They just demoed everything, and up the buildings go. Um, in regards to um, making things livable, I mean, where the old Lawrence Brickworks were, they built a housing estate on that. That was a derelict site for 10 years, and they put houses up. They didn't care. Near Long Hill Park, that was a derelict site. They put a skate park right on top of the dump, and they were in the field. There was, you could see rubble many years. Slowly they started to clear that. But yeah, that was a derelict site for a long time, and they built houses backing onto Long Hill Park. Where I live right now, they're building on the floodplain for Christ's sake, because you can get the land cheap. Get the land cheap. They're building on old agricultural land. Get the land cheap. The old army base just down the road from me at Arborfield. Literally, I can walk to the old army base from my flat. It will take me about an hour and a half, 2 hours. I'm in the Arborfield Green development. They're going to be building on there for the next 14 years. Next 14 years. And they've still got old army buildings to demolish. The old army stables are still there. The old army store depot, the old depot, the vehicles are still there. They're throwing things up quick. So when we're talking about old industrial unit, it was an ice rink since 1986. They broke ground. They opened it in 1987. It stood for 33 years before they 33, 34 years before they demoed it. Still a long time, but you know they are doing a lot of building work. They are building a new housing development right behind again in old industrial wasteland. So, but look what they did with Arlington Square. Look what they've done with Farnborough, with Reading, the old biscuit factory in Reading is a housing estate. Not very nice housing estate, but it's a housing estate. Where the Medeski's was they built on that. It doesn't matter if it's residential or commercial or what. That they a huge warehouse. They built next door. John, they also own the whole all the way up to the Bratton Tip. All those offices were leased initially. They've demoed the old HP offices and they built a massive warehouse there. They're building a housing estate opposite next to 3M, yeah, Farleywood. Um, but again, I can't comment on a town that I no longer live in, but I do know that you know a lot of the new builds are on old farmland. Um, there's a lot going on, but where I live now, to the south side of Wokingham, um, there's developments going up all over the place, um, all over the place. It, it's ridiculous. The old army barracks, Arborfield Green. It's it's ridiculous how much they're building there. Um, Absolutely ridiculous how much they're building there, and that impacts obviously other services and other things. It's like the old Bracknell Town Stadium is being demoed, or was going to be demoed, and I used to live right by that. You know, obviously, I follow a page of Lost Grounds and Terraces football grounds page on Facebook. They could even put some rugby league and rugby union stadiums on there as well. But I follow some of these pages of iconic old football stadiums and rugby stadiums, cricket grounds, and all that I've got. And some of them they've just closed down. They haven't even demoed them. They're still crumbling, still crumbling because nothing's happened. I'm trying to remember who you are. Um, I haven't lived in Bracknell for 4 years, so I I don't miss living there. What I do miss is yeah, going and watch games at the ice rink. I do miss watching games at the ice rink. I do. Um, uh, that was a Saturday or a Sunday night weekend staple. Um, and was very very enjoyable for a very very long time. Um, but you know, oh, Skeggsy, where you living, Skeggs? How you doing? Surprised you subscribed to the channel and kept subscribing. How you doing, Skeg? How's your old man? I wasn't where I was talking to. Small world. Where are you living these days, anyway? Um, are you living in Farnborough? That's fair. I'm only up in Finch. I mean, I'm only a couple of stops on the train. Um, Literally, if I get on the train at Crowthorne, I'm in Farnborough North pretty quick. I've actually got to go to PC World in Farnborough, pick up a laptop at some point. But no, I right now it's either going to Slough, which is difficult with Rob, but he's obviously got his kids, or it's going to the Guildford Spectrum possibly and getting hold of my mate Dave. But my mate Dave has moved from Camberley to Shefford on Loddon, which is on the way to Basingstoke. Oh God, you originally subbed to the channel when it was in double digits. That's got to be that's 2017. Oh, good grief! But how is your old man doing it? Well, look, is your old man still sponsoring the team? Because I've got to go through my jersey collection and then work out what season each jersey's from. Um, can Everton make it 4 wins in a row today? There's nothing to say they can't. I think Luton out of the teams in the relegation fight are giving it a good go. But Everton, Everton, though it could be off-field issues, could relegate them up. They are still potentially facing, obviously, a further point deduction. If they go into administration, there are still things happening off the field that could. We'll have to see. They might be forced to sell a lot of players in this transfer window to make money. Um, um, I have a bad feeling about our game tomorrow against Wolves. Fulham Wolves. God. Um, well, I'm a Blackburn fan, so we're good one week, terrible the next. I've got to see the fixtures now. Let me just double check the football fixtures because I really haven't paid attention to them. I fell asleep. I got in from work yesterday and I was in bed by 4 o'clock. I was asleep. I was done. 4 o'clock. I was asleep. And I'm not joking. I was actually snoozing. 4 o'clock yesterday. I've been all over the place sleep wise since the clock's changed. My sleep patterns have gone out the window. Um, let's get on to the sport. Let's have a look at the fixtures. Um, Steve Cooper could be getting sacked by Forest. I think Nottingham Forest could actually be one of the coaches that gets sacked next. I mean, I'm really looking. I'm looking at the potential. I'm really not a renowned good sleeper. I'm really not. Exact opposite. Right. So today, Bournemouth are at home against Luton. That's going to be a good game. Really think that's going to be a good game. But Bournemouth have been a sleeper team. Bournemouth are on a run at the moment. Chelsea, Sheffield United, that could be a banana skin for Chelsea. But Sheffield United haven't had a great season. Their defence is shocking, and they've already sacked the manager and replaced the manager. City, Palace, I think that could be a draw. I actually think Man City could slip up against Palace. Newcastle, Fulham, I think that's big game for Newcastle to bounce back after crashing out of Champions League at group stage. Fulham, eh, Fulham on that's my view on Fulham. I just don't know. Burnley Everton. That's going to be interesting because Burnley have had a shocking return to the Premier League. Um, Considering how they played last season, really shocking. Shocking return. Oh, we're playing Southampton away. That could be interesting. We generally have a good record against Southampton away. So um, let's have a look at tomorrow's fixtures because I will be watching the Women's Super League and I will be doing a match review. I just really haven't been 100% the last little while. I actually think you're going to be all right. I think West Ham will get a result tomorrow. I think positivity out of the European campaign. Um, they're playing quite well. I think that could be a good result for West Ham tomorrow. I think actually all the games tomorrow, Arsenal Brighton's going to be a tasty one. Brighton again, good form. Villa Brentford, I think look, Villa are on fire right now. The Man United Liverpool game is going to be the game where I think Ten Hag is done. Personally, tomorrow I will be watching the Man United women versus Liverpool women, just because it's the reverse fixture of the men. They're playing the other way around with Man United at home. But there's some good games on in the Women's Super League tomorrow, which I will be watching. Just get out of that quickly. No, I think Brentford will potentially be Brentford at home. They're a solid side. They're not outstanding. They're solid sides. I can see them making it difficult, but the way Villa are playing, I think Villa are on fire right now. Um, Fulham though are a bit hit. I just think this season, I think there are Steve Cooper. We know is facing the axe at Forest, and I think Forest could be one of the teams if Luton can pick up a bit, keep fighting in games and pushing teams close. Luton can score. I think Forest could be the side that slips into the bottom three. I still think Brentford will make things difficult for Villa. Try and hit them on the counter attack, disrupt the play. But Brentford are a solid side. Villa are just having a really amazing season and are really on some momentum. But I also think Bournemouth, going under the radar, people are underrating Bournemouth at their peril, and they're climbing up the table. In other news, there is a Brentford fan who was trying to take me to court over using one of his pictures in my youth. So that's the reason why you got demonetised. Oh wow. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. Um, Look, this is why when people say to me, "Oh, I should use thumbnails and I should use graphics," try and. Well, that's why I don't use thumbnails and graphics. Yeah, this is why. Oh, this happened after. Obviously, they doubled down on the shit. But again, people say to me, I always get in comments, "Oh, you should use graphics. You should, jazz it up. Oh, you should tidy up all this mess." Firstly, yeah, I will get round to the massive pile of shite that is my flat. I really do. I On my week off, I was looking at my days off. I was like, "This is a massive pile of shite. This needs to be tidied up." But we will get to that. But I do say this: there's a reason why I don't use thumbnails. There's a reason why I keep things so basic on the channel, so simple. It avoids copyright. It avoids a lot of issues where you are going to get tagged for a copyright infringement because of a thumbnail or because of using footage. Like people say, I should do watch-alongs, or I'm actually watching a game live and doing a live stream. No, firstly, my laptop couldn't cope with that because it's a 6-year-old laptop that is getting replaced soon. And secondly, again, copyright violation. Um, Copyright violation. Um, um, well, Kenya and Uganda to make a women's international rugby league. Look, again, we've got to start somewhere. International rugby league is lagging behind other international sports. It is lagging behind in organisation, funding, TV deals, and getting things off the ground. But look, I think that's a positive that two East African nations are playing an international, especially in the women's game. Considering cultural aspects of these nations and where these nations are with money and economic development, that is quite fantastic. Have I been following the NHL? Of course, I've been following the NHL. There's been some incidents in the NHL. There's been a lot of discussion points in the NHL. Um, Obviously, we've seen 3 coaches sacked so far. I think there'll be more coaches tumbling before the season's done. I think more coaches will be losing their jobs. Um, I am surprised, however, with the 3 coaches who've gone. I am surprised with that. There's an ongoing issue with the Minnesota Wild uh, away from the ice in the GM's office with Bill Guerin as GM, and things going on there in the background. Um, and Yeah, there's just a few minor trades taking place overnight. We're about to see the roster freeze for Christmas in the next couple of days, so we may see some more trades and waiver wire pickups, and we may see some more action in regards to player movement in the next few days before the roster freeze comes in. When that roster freeze comes in, obviously is uh, going to curtail things for the Christmas break, and then obviously players come back. YouTube came back after I appealed, and they said they had made a mistake for the copyright strike. They are happy to reinstate the video. It's the Brentford fan who has doubled down. Look, again, this is why when people say I should have thumbnails and do live match watch-alongs, I don't. It just takes out that risk of a copyright violation, and those 3 strikes, and you lose your money, and then you have reduced income, and it just takes that risk is taken away. The risk is taken away completely. Um, and look, people say that that the channel's taken a long time to grow. Look, after the issues with the subscriber count and the bot issues and the spam accounts, guess what? Last few weeks, no spam accounts on the channel, all natural growth. We've rebounded well past where we were, so the subscriber count now is higher than 2 months ago. And naturally, guess what? Views are sort of recovering a little bit. But I've noticed I haven't done a lot of content the last week and a half, and yeah, view counts are a little bit on the low side. But there are people still watching in the background. Certain videos are still getting views, which is a positive. Um, I've got to do some career videos on a couple of people at some point. I will be doing a Christmas live stream, which I do every year. So the ugly Christmas jersey comes out. So yay! Um, he won £670 for use of the picture, which went for 20 seconds for a video I made no money on. Huh. So you haven't profited at all. Um, that will go to small claims court, and probably get thrown out, and one or the other will have to pay the money. Um, Not a lot you can really do about that. If we're being honest, it's one of them. Yeah, he has copyright right, but how he can set such an arbitrary random figure where he could have sold that picture to Getty Images, for example, and every time that is repurposed, he gets that's a very specific number, 670 quid. Oh, now obviously my mate Jamie's in the chat. Obviously, sadly, his brother passed away. So Jamie, my condolences to obviously your family. Um, by the way, Jamie, I want to say obviously condolences for obviously your brother passing away, but um, yeah, I had some bereavements last summer as well, and this year. So my condolences to you. But um, you know, I lost two of my best mates passed away a couple of weeks apart last year, just after your brother passed away, and this year I've lost my nan and my uncle have passed away again, short space of time. My uncle was only a month or so ago, so I understand how you're feeling, and yeah, um, obviously I didn't know your brother very well, but I met him a fair few times at games and down the pub and all that, and that was stunning how young he was. Um, so whenever we're discussing, player health, and I do say this because your brother was bloody fit. He was fit and healthy, and that's what scares me is how young he was and how fit and healthy he was. Um, and you know, if I could have come to the funeral, I would have, but I had two other funerals literally, and work, getting a bit arsy with me having to go. I've lost another friend. I just work were getting arsy with me having, two funerals off where I had to go, and then I had my nan's funeral, and then I couldn't get to my uncle's. So it just got. I was in a bit of a bad place last summer and this summer. It just, but what scared me was how young your brother was and how fit and healthy he was. Considering that he weren't a you know it stunned me when you actually what happened to him. That scared the shit out of me. And my brother's not been particularly well. If you remember my brother Jamie, yeah, he's not so little anymore. He's a bit of a gym monkey now, but he's been seriously. My brother's not been well. My brother collapsed last Easter, um, and he's basically a severe asthmatic now, which is the best way to put it. But he's not truly asthmatic, um, and we believe his lung problems are down to vapes because his job, he goes up into roof cavities laying cable, and there's obviously asbestos and fiberglass and all that, and he's as an electrician. And he's never once complained of any breathing issues. He's got a skin complaint, but he's never complained of any breathing problems. And then he decided to start vaping, and bang out of nowhere, he collapsed and rushed into hospital, and they put him on oxygen inhalers, and now he's not been well. Um, and it's just out of nowhere. Um, so yeah, it is quite scary. But when we talk about um, athletes going through their when they sign for teams, they have to go through medicals and all that. Only one country in the world um, will. Yeah, Jamie, my little brother is not so little no more. He's a he's a bit of a gym monkey now. He's had a growth spurt, not a brain spurt. He's still thick as pig shit, but how he's getting paid, 7 grand more than me a year. I don't know, but I'm a Bintman and he's a Sparky. I just don't know how that happens. But no, what we see in professional sport is there's growing calls for more stricter medicals because obviously Christian Eriksen, everyone saw Christian Eriksen at the Euros collapsing on the field, and obviously Inter Milan, he's an Inter Milan player, and under Italian law, he's got a heart problem. He cannot play sport. The Italians are the only country which have such a strict medical um, regulations when athletes, football doesn't matter any sport. If a heart condition is picked up or any other condition that will affect the respiratory system, so a lung problem, you cannot. I repeat this: you will not get a contract. They will not insure you. You'll be said, no, you've got to retire. It happened to Manuel Amunia. They picked up a heart condition. That was when he left Watford. He was a free agent, and Cagliari wanted to sign him, and pinged up, got a heart problem, can't play no more. That medical strictness has actually saved a lot of lives. Ironically, it has saved lives. Now there are calls across the board to strengthen the medicals that players go through, and they should be more regular to pick up on these health complaints that can have catastrophic consequences, like Fabrice Muamba, for example. These screenings should be more regular. They already prevent, they already say to football players and rugby players, don't ride motorcycles, don't go skiing, we won't insure you. And that's because of Matty Jansen and his motorcycle accident when he was a Blackburn player. And I remember when Matty Jansen had his accident, because I was watching the Watford game at Vicarage Road. And Watford were in the league below at the time, but I was watching a Watford game. I can't remember who they were playing. Who were they playing? I've got the programme somewhere. But I was watching a Watford game and they were playing at home, and radio comes on, and breaking news, and it was breaking news, and it was on the radio, and obviously he was omitted from the lineup. Turns out, obviously, the night before he'd been involved in a very serious motorcycle accident, shattered leg and brain injuries. He fractured he nearly died. He was in a coma, and he never fully recovered from that accident. But he obviously had he scored the winning goal in the League Cup final against Spurs, but he never fully recovered from the injuries he sustained in that accident. Let's just say that he was never the same player, and he had a lot of health complications. So clubs would say to players, "You cannot ride a motorcycle while we won't insure you. We can't get the insurance." They wrote it into contracts. Same with skiing; they wrote it into contracts. And I remember that. I remember listening to the radio. We were leaving the ground. Final score was coming on Radio 5 Live. You had Talk Sport and all that on the radio. Flicked the radio on, and that was breaking news. Blackburn striker Matty Jansen, life-threatening injuries, motorcycle accident. Yeah, I remember that clear as day. And then, this Reyes killed in a traffic accident. Former Arsenal and I think Sevilla player Jose Antonio Reyes was killed in a traffic accident, and it hits home. And then of course you have Iker Casillas, basically having a heart attack in training. So I can't remember the St. Louis Blues player who collapsed on the bench, but there was a Blues player collapsed on the bench in the 2019-2020 season and had a heart attack. I think it was Jay Bowmeister, if I remember correctly. And I think there's been growing calls to have stricter and stricter medicals for players in a variety of sports. I can't remember who the cricketer was, but I did a video on him when he became an England selector. um, Taylor. I think was it Jordan Taylor, batsman for England. He had a handful of tests behind him, and he was a very accomplished batsman. And they found out that he had a massive hole in the heart and was going to die. And he just didn't feel well one day. When the doctors went, "Oh, you've got a rare heart condition, and without surgery, it will kill you. You have to have life-saving heart surgery." Um, so this is a thing. And of course, the conspiracy theorists will come out with their tin hats on and go, "Oh, look, the COVID vaccine and all this, and all these players suddenly collapsing. It's a thing." And I don't buy into those conspiracy theories, but it's a thing. So you know, um, you know, uh, Jamie's younger brother passed away, and it was very sudden. And he was a few years younger than us, but he was the fit. He was very, very fit, very, very healthy, and it was yeah, quite shocking, and it actually scared me a little bit because I'm a few years older than Jamie, and that actually was quite that was quite scary. Having but then our mate Chris had um, heart problems and prostate cancer, the same age as me. Now he sadly died in a motorcycle accident, but he had, again had a young man in his 20s shouldn't be having prostate cancer. It's not a common, but it's a thing. And I think Italy leads the way in protecting athletes, even though it could end their careers. It protects them. It protects their health. It makes sure they can get the treatment required, and it also saves lives. And there are growing calls to strengthen. It's better. I just love having a bad back. To for other countries to bring in much stricter um, medical screenings for athletes. And the Christian Eriksen debate, the Christian Eriksen incident, ignited that debate. And the fact that he returned to play for Manchester United and he got back playing was fantastic. Um, Absolutely fantastic. And he, of course, very, very fortunate, that he was able to do that. But when he collapsed on the field, that did create a lot of debate in sports circles around player welfare and making sure players were getting these checks. So there's that. No, it's been. Question. But no, yeah, history of football. That's 600. The Brentford fan wanting exactly £670. Normally, small claims court. It's yeah, it's very interesting that he's wanting a very specific amount of money for an image that made you no money, which is an image that's in the public domain as well. So, I mean, that in itself is an eyebrow raiser. Um, uh, but I am glad that your channel got reinstated. Should I say, back into the partner program, and you're making money again. That they made an error. But again, this is again when people say I should use thumbnails and I should do this and that. Like, I want to avoid issues like this where I could be done for copyright and having issues. It just takes that whole aspect out of it, takes the whole risk out of it, and it's one less stress for me. Really, I can put it that way, a bit nicely. It's one less worry that I have in regards to the channel having any problems. It's just simple. I like keeping things simple on the channel. It works for me. It's easier to just quickly upload videos, get live streams up, just make content simple and effective. Obviously, I would like to have a bit more of a studio set up and a bit more, I wouldn't say professional, but a bit more structure behind the channel a little bit. But while still working a full-time job, that just isn't a viable option right now. I would hope it would become a viable option in the future once we reach that monetization threshold, and we are getting closer to that. Um, and look, subscriber count is great. I mean, it's good. And there are some big sporting events coming up. And I think in the new year, when we have the FA Cup third round, I won't be able to watch every third round game that I want to watch because of work commitments. But I will try my best. I think I won't be able to watch the Arsenal Liverpool game. I think I'm working when the Arsenal Liverpool game is being played. But I'll try my best to watch as many of the third round games as I can, um, and do match reviews on them. And again, the Women's Super League. I've actually been enjoying watching the Women's Super League recently. It's free. It's got free to wear coverage. And Arsenal beating Chelsea 5-1 last week in front of 58,000 people at the Emirates. Yeah, tells you something. And then people will criticise, saying, "Oh, they're giving away free tickets." Well, the ticket price is clearly reasonable, and there were plenty of men in attendance. I can tell you that. And it was a great attacking performance from the Arsenal women, the Arsenal ladies. They really ran Chelsea all over the place. Chelsea just looked very, very unsure at the back. They looked very compressed in the middle third of the field. The defensive line was too high. The midfield was sat literally on the centre circle, and the front two were just not connecting. It was just they were just wedged in a third of the field, and they tried to condense that bit and just ball over the top, and they were all over the place. Then they lost in midweek in Europe. So Arsenal put down a statement win in the Women's Super League last weekend, and now tomorrow I'll be watching the Man United Liverpool game, which is a flip of the men's fixture with Liverpool at home against Man United away, Man United at home in the Women's Super League against Liverpool away. That's going to be fun to watch because Liverpool can score goals. Apparently, I've watched one Liverpool game. They scored early, but then defensively were all over the place. Against, I think it was against Chelsea actually. So I'm looking forward to that. And it's fun. I don't mind watching women's football. It's refreshing. It's different. They play it in a different way. I treat it like a different sport in a sense, but I also treat it as live sport and fun sport to watch. And I do think Man United go into that game tomorrow against Liverpool in the Women's Super League as favourites because they're at home. And with the way that Man United played in the last game I watched them play in the Women's Super League, they just looked all right against Bristol. They didn't look quite at the races. They were slow and plodding and a bit off the boil. Liverpool got a bit of pace about them in the women's squad, so it's going to be an interesting game. And that's I think it's 12:15 kickoff tomorrow, so it's a lunchtime kickoff tomorrow. So I'll be watching that and looking forward to that. I think that will be a very, very good game. The pace that was played last week in the Arsenal women's win over Chelsea women, the pace that game was played at was ridiculous. That was a 90-minute match that flew by. That first half, barely, apart from the goals going in, barely any stoppages, that game flew by. The intensity and pace that Arsenal approached that game against Chelsea last week flew by. The ridiculous game, absolutely ridiculous game. Fun game to watch, ridiculous game. But yeah, really, really fun game to watch. Just the pace and movement. They just went out the blocks like a freight train, and they were able to sustain it. So that was fun to watch, and I think the weather conditions impacted how the game was played. I think squad rotation impacted how the way the game was played, and then Arsenal had some players coming back like Beth Mead, who's been out for a long time with obviously a knee injury. There were question marks over how she's going to return from a lengthy injury. It doesn't matter what sport we're looking at. Knee injuries are the worst, in my opinion. Knee injuries and knee reconstructions are the worst to come back from. And you learn. So there are certain sports that I've watched where a player coming back re-injures the same knee or injures the other knee, and then they have to have another knee reconstruction. and it can be career-ending. Um, and you know, yes, medical science and procedures have come a long way since the 80s and 90s and 2000s, but yeah, some of those knee injuries. I mean, Michael Owen was never the same player after his knee injury. Um, was never the same player. Although he had some hamstring problems, his knee injury basically that was when his career he never fully got back to having that same level of pace and acceleration and movement. Um, rugby league, I would say Trent Hodgkinson. Um, by the end, he was held together by gaffer tape. Former Newcastle Knights and Canterbury Bulldogs player and New South Wales Blues 5'8". He was held together with sticky tape basically by the end. Um, but there's been quite a few rugby league players who've done nasty, nasty knee injuries. Who've taken a long time to get back. That first season back, they're not really great. Second season, they seem to return to some resurgence and form, um, and that's noticeable. So Beth Mead, the way she played last weekend was fantastic. Really, that's a really positive sign for England as well, for England's women. Um, that she's back and firing and looking motivated and hungry to play, which I think England were missing last year in the women's World Cup. They were missing that in the final. They were missing that in the tournament. They were missing a Beth Mead type player. I think she was a difference maker by not being there, and Fran Kirby as well. I think they were key pieces missing from the England women's side in the World Cup last year that lost to Spain. If they were in the side, I think we win the game. I think we win the tournament, and we're having a different discussion about women's football in this country and the direction it's headed. I do think that the game has grown massively, and when you're playing in front of a record crowd, 58,000, that's pretty good. But saying that, I started at the beginning of the stream discussing the RFL, the Rugby League, bringing in these new tackle rules to basically copy rugby union, basically, um, and the way that they've been handling that. And my answer to this is simple. And again, with the Rugby World Cup as well, I was very critical of the TMO review system and how there was too much time wasted with watching replays and reviewing stuff. The way to fix the problems that those two sports face is give the referees on-field power again and high contact. Just send the players off. Suspend players for lengthy periods for dirty hits. Suddenly that clears up that aspect of the game, and then tackle technique, fix it. That's on coaches. Don't have to change tackle heights, just change tackle technique. No, but BBC Sports Personality of the Year? Nah, no real interest. I haven't had interest in that for, oh God, was I still? I haven't had it. I haven't watched it since I was what 15, 16 years old. Maybe even longer than that. I haven't watched it for nearly 20 years. Plus, I mean, I'm what 34 now. I can't remember the last time I watched Sports Pertinent. I think the last year I watched it, James Toseland was Super White World Champion for the second time. He was double Super White World Champion, and he was one of the nominees. So we're going back. We're going back. Christ, James Toseland. Got to be 15, 16 years, if not longer. Because I'm 34 now. I thought the last time I would have watched or had any real interest where like I'm actually staying in to watch this. Because normally on a weekend I'll go to the pub. So we're talking potentially nearly 20 years away. Potentially. Yeah, that is a long time ago. Maybe 15 years ago. Well, Ryan Giggs, I think, would have been given a lifetime achievement award for what he did on the field, but then find out that his off-field indiscretions. I don't think he'll be getting a lifetime achievement award anytime soon. But I remember when James Toseland was up for Sports Personality of the Year awards, two-time World Superbike champion. Yeah, well, James Toseland. Um, trying to think when he. Let me have a quick look at when James Toseland won his second um, world title. Well, he's only 43. Wow, he's only 9 years older than me. That's insane. Right, let me have a look at his career because the year he won his second world title would have been the year he was um, nominated for. Right, so 2007. 2007 was the last year I watched it because that was the year he was nominated. Um, yeah, 2007 was the time he won his second title. Um, yeah, crikey, 2007. So there you go. We're in 2023 now. 2007. Um, God, I would have been 18. I'm now 34. So there you go. That's and I started watching it, and then I went to the pub. So there you go. That's how long ago that was. So for me, I haven't watched it for a very very long time. I was still a student. Um, wow, I just feel old. It does seem like yesterday when he was because that's the 2007 was when James Tozer rode his motorcycle on stage and also played piano because he's a classically trained pianist. Um, but yeah, like for me, I think sports personality of the year has completely lost has lost all meaning. It's regularly criticised by a lot of sports fans. Like, really, who are some of these people? Um, like, I understand why the BBC started it up initially. It was to reward athletes who had done and teams who had done well in their particular fields of sport. Young rookies, young sport, all these things. Um, so let me just have a look at all the winners of Sports Personality of the Year because it's become a very um, divisive program. Viewership figures are you know uh, just not where they were. Right, BBC Sports Person because it's obviously BBC Sports Personality of the Year. It's not like Government Award. Right, it was devised back in 1954 by a guy called Paul Fox. Um, and 8 awards are currently presented. So you've got Team of the Year, Overseas Personality of the Year, Lifetime Achievement, uh, the Helen Rollason Award, the Coach Award, the Newcomer Award, which is now a Young Sports Personality of the Year, and the Unsung Hero. Um, right, so let's have a look at history. Wow, so between 1954 and 56, it was held at the Savoy in London. 57 to 58 at the Grosvenor House Hotel in London. 59 Television Theatre. 60 to 64 Television Centre. And then Television Theatre, 65, 76. And then it's been all over the place. Presenters, Peter Dimmock, all the way through to, oh God, Alex Scott and Gabby Logan. Alex Scott's I'm just not watching it. I have dignity. Um, Um, yeah. So the trophy itself. Oh, Christopher Chataway was the first winner of the award in 1954. My thoughts on Joey Barton. Well, Joey Barton. I mean, this is a guy who has spent time in prison. This is a guy who had an 18-month ban from the sport he participates in for breaching 1,000, was it 1,800 gambling offences? Um, in regards to commentary, there's some very, very good female presenters in sport. There are also a lot of shocking male commentators and presenters in sport. Um, for me, I mean, the guy to take any kind of societal advice from Joe Biden, you've got to be really on very strong drugs and heavily sedated. This is a guy who has assaulted fellow teammates. This is a guy who has been to prison for assault. This is a guy who hasn't condoned the racist murder that his half brother committed in Liverpool. This is a guy who got suspended from all footballing activity for 18 months for well over 1,000 betting breaches. This is a guy, when he was playing for QPR, decided to try and fight half the Man City team. Um, yeah, um, yeah, he's been involved in as a manager in altercations. Um, yeah, I mean, look, I'm not against having female commentators and presenters, and there are some really good ones. And as I watch a lot of, NRL and AFL, there's some really good female commentators, pitch live reporters, journalists, and presenters out there. There's some pretty bad ones as well. There's some pretty good ones, and they're pretty good at what they do. There's also some pretty shocking male presenters and pundits. I think they should just be there on the quality of their work rather than their gender or background or race, religion, or whatever it may be. Unfortunately, I think where he's getting at is the tick. I think he's actually no. I think he's just an arsehole. I don't listen to a word Joe Barton says. He's not a particularly nice individual. He's a very controversial character within football. Um, he's got a very checkered history within the game. Um, as I say, when I'm watching the women's football tomorrow, there'll be an all-female punditry lineup and commentary lineup. Now, in that regards, I haven't got a problem with that. I don't really have a problem with a female presenter as or commentator as long as she's good at what she does. Um, yeah, I think Joe Barton's an arsehole. His comments, well, yeah, cool. There's some really crap female presenters and commentators. Yay. There's quite a fair few male commentators and presenters are even worse. So, yeah, some of the time I'm not really listening to the commentary. I'm actually watching what's happening on the pitch or on the ice or on the court or whatever sport I'm watching. I'm not really listening to the commentary because I'm more focused on what's actually happening in the game itself. And guess what? There's also an option where you can just mute the sound. You can just press mute and you just watch the game. There's also an option where you can just have fan noise only, no commentary. Um, so his comments, though, I mean, he's controversial anyway. Um, I don't think he's helping his employment chances because he's a football manager now. God, I would hate to be in a dressing room which he's managing. Um, but no, I don't take anything that Joe Barton says seriously. This is a guy who's got a track record of being a vile human being. Um, at the same time, it's like with is it Megan Rapinoe, the former US women's captain? I don't take anything she says seriously because she just comes across as an absolute moron, and she doesn't do anything to advance her cause because some of the statements she comes out with are absolutely like, "What are you saying? How thick do you sound?" Um, yeah, if you're listening on the radio, muting could be a problem. Yes, it could. But I do think there has been an agenda by the mainstream media to, yeah, try and get as many women and people of minority backgrounds into onto the face of commentary and TV and presenting when clearly it's a tick box driven exercise, and they're not there on their merit, which actually then devalues when they do get there on merit, because when someone does get there on merit, they feel like a fraud because so many have been put there not on merit but on, it's a woman, or it's a black man, or it's a black lesbian woman. There you go. And they're not there on merit; they're just there because it's a tick box exercise. If he's criticising that, then you should be criticising a lot of the male commentators as well. Look at Talksport. Gabby Bonlaw is unlistenable unless you're watching it live on the YouTube channel. If you're listening on the radio on Talksport and Gabby Bonlaw, Clinton Morrison, it's just Trevor Sinclair. They are terrible. But if we call it, if they were female, that's sexist. No, no, there's some pretty terrible male commentators. There's some pretty terrible male presenters. A lot of them are on Talksport. I think Laura Woods gets some unfair criticism, although she does make a few howlers every now and then as a presenter. But she knows her stuff. She's not thick. Um, what the ICC? What, with his slogan on his shoes? Ooh, the ICC, the International Cricket Council, which is basically the Indian cricket board dominated. Um, ooh, uh, depends in what context you're looking at the slogan. Um, but we are getting into some awkward territory where there will be those who are saying freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and then there'll be those who are saying, well, we've had the rainbow laces and rainbow tape campaigns, and they've caused controversy. So it's a difficult one. Like I say, the repugnant right will say keep the politics out of sport. It's all bollocks, blah blah blah. Blah. And then the loony left will be like, oh, he should be allowed to say whatever he wants. Just keep the politics out of sport. There you go. Cricket, cricket's got its own issues. But look, I would say, having not knowing what actually was on his shoes, so I can't comment on the particular incident. I would say this: let's just get all politics out of sport at a professional level. It's bad enough with the Olympics, um, as is the Commonwealth Games becoming political footballs. Um, we've had enough, you know, controversy surrounding recent major sporting events. We are seeing that the silent majority are now finding a voice where they're getting frustrated where sports have been hijacked by. Yeah, I would say that we're starting to, the BLM were taking a knee and the rainbow armbands and rainbow laces, and then we've had a captain refuse to, Sheffield United captain refused to wear the rainbow armband, and we've had a few high-profile NHL players, and then of course the left wing will go, oh, they're homophobic. No, I would think we'll find it's a cultural thing. There's a lot of where now Homeland, they may not be homophobe or a transphobe, but in their homeland it could be highly illegal to be seen to promote that, and therefore they have relatives and friends who may be persecuted by a very corrupt government. Um, yeah, I mean the ICC. I mean we are getting into where the left and right, the polar politics and sport is not a good mix. We've seen a lot of, especially left wing orientated efforts to, you know, yeah, the war on woke or whatever it is. I don't know. I watch sport to escape from my day to day grind. So I watch sports to escape from my day to day grind. So I'm looking forward to the NRL season uh, kicking off in March in Vegas. I like watching sport to get away from the day to day grind. When you get these political statements, you can shove it. I don't care what your cause is, like you can shove it. I watch sport to escape reality for a couple of hours. It's our escapism. It's where a lot of society goes just to go, free from it for a couple of hours. Because unfortunately, a lot of these, you know, protests they're doing are becoming more divisive. And when the 99% of the silent majority show their displeasure, they're labelled as racist or homophobic. No, like, we just don't want the political crap. Any other day of the week, we will back it, get it off. Just don't want the political crap, and it's starting to become more divisive and more damaging to continue with it because it's creating a narrative which shouldn't be there. So there's that. Well, Jerome Luai's big money move? No, I don't think it works. I think they've paid too much for him. I think he's been asking for too much money from Penrith. They were right not to pay out the money because it unbalances their salary cap because they're constantly got players coming through. Cogger had more of an impact on the grand final than he did. He's gone as well. Yeah, I don't think it's going to work. I think that's going to be the thing is, they've been in discussions with Jerome Luai before the board en masse resigned and left before the board changes. Now you've got Shane Richardson as interim head of the board. They pulled out of us trying to sign Adam Fanua-Blake to table this offer because they were trying to get sign both players. But I don't think it works. I don't think they've overpaid for one, so that's a problem with their salary cap. They seem to always overpay, and they're not getting their junior development right. They're letting players go who end up at other clubs or in the Super League and have great success, and it ends up biting the West Tigers on the arse. Like Pappenhausen, Adokar, Moses, just to name a few. Aaron Woods has gone. Ultimately, he's gone through several clubs since he left, but Luke Brooks has finally left the club. It tells you that there's a massive problem here, and they're trying to solve that problem by overpaying for a player who's good. I wouldn't say he's the solution because he needs a player alongside him to add stability in that halves axis. They don't have that. They don't have a spine. And Luai, yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens at the Tigers. This could be another disastrous season for them. And I've got to do some more videos on disastrous NRL seasons with the wooden spoonists. Look at where they finished, and I can look at obviously the disastrous. I mean, I started that with doing the Western Suburb Magpies video, 98 and 99, the forerunner to the West Tigers. What is scary with the West Tigers is if they've made the top 8 3 times in 24 years. So that just tells you there's a lot more issues than just 2 back-to-back wooden spoons. They have not been a good side for a very, very long time. How the situation with Madge, with Michael Maguire, and how they dealt with his exit, and how they dealt with and he's a Premiership winning coach. He's won in Super League and in the NRL. He's an international coach. He's not now because New Zealand sacked him stupidly, but one of the best coaches in the game could not get them to win. They really, really failed in that regard. They've overspent on players. David Northaluma in the discussion about his refusing to train or and disagreeing with how Benji Marshall and Robbie Farah's training regime. He played alongside these guys. He knows what's expected. I think Benji Marshall. I definitely think he's gonna have his work cut out. They've given him the old board gave him a 5-year contract. The last time I can think of a coach, and a rookie coach going in, apart from Serraldo at the Bulldogs, but I think there's a plan there with their juniors and recruitment. But the last time a coach was a rookie coach with very limited experience going into a club was Anthony Seibold, and that was a 5-year contract, and he was sacked well before the end of the 2020 season. And yet, that fell apart rapidly, very rapidly, a year and a half into his 5-year deal. Serraldo's got a full season under his belt. And there's some green shoots, obviously. So there's some young coaches who are like Fitzgibbons early on in his head coaching career. But what is different between Benji Marshall and those other coaches is they all had lengthy stints as assistants. He did not have a lengthy stint as an assistant. I think they need to get Brett Camorley up from reserve grade to help him. Because he's had a long time coaching reserve grade. They need to get the right pieces in there. And it's not players, it's coaching. It's getting the juniors and the production line of talent through into first grade. They've made a lot of errors there. They need to get their scouting right. And they've got to stop overpaying players. If there is improvement and they climb the ladder, I'm not expecting them to make the top 8, but if they can climb the ladder and go upwards rather than stay at the bottom, if they can get 12th, somewhere around 12th, I think that would be a decent first season with Benji Marshall. They have to win more games. They cannot start this coming season like they started last season with a lengthy losing streak, where that was their season done after about 5-6 games. They were done. The damage had been done. They weren't getting momentum. They were losing heavily. They were battered from pillar to post in multiple games. That was their season done. Season done. They have to get off to, I would say, a 3-5 start in the first 8 would be acceptable. Out of the first 10, maybe winning 4 games would be acceptable. I think that would be a decent start. I'm not expecting miracles. Maybe winning 6 out of the first 10 would be a decent start. Build a little bit of a foundation. I don't see them making the top 8. I don't see them making the top 10. I can see them being around 12th, 14th. I think that would be a decent first season. They can then build on. Can the Dragons improve next year? In my opinion, the Dragons should exchange Hunt for some youth. I would say Ben Hunt. Obviously, Flanagan's gone in there. He signed his son, which adds a halves combination. I think Hunt and Flanagan in the halves could actually be a good choice. I think that could work. Maybe Flanagan at hooker could work. or Ben Hunt, rotate a little bit, get some spine there. I think they are going to again be looking to not finish as low down, but they've had a lot of issues. And again, dual venture club, divided board, a lot of issues in the boardroom, a lot of issues with juniors, a lot of issues with chopping and changing the coach, lack of success, lack of finals. Since they've been a dual venture club, some bad contracts. Ben Hunt, I think without Ben Hunt, the team would have got the win swing. I think Fano has got a tough job, but he's got experience, and Hugh Marshall doesn't. But say that, both these clubs are basket cases. Both of them are not good enough. They're both dual venture clubs. Every other club is a single entity. These are dual venture clubs where they've got divided boardrooms. They have, they don't have one home stadium. They have multiples where they go on the little road trips. And they have got frustrated fan bases. It's just a perfect storm. They've got underperforming players. And there's been in recent years they've had to, the Dragons have had off-field dramas with players misbehaving. The Tigers have overpaid for players who don't perform at the level they're being paid for. I would say Flanagan's encouraged Ben Hunt to stay. Obviously, he wanted to release last year. Flanagan's encouraged him to stay. Again, a club that needs a good start to the season. First 5 games, win 3, would be a good start. They need to get off on a good start to the season, as I say. Otherwise, Dragons, much like Tigers, wooden spoon contenders. But the Dragons have been favourites for the wooden spoon for the last 3 seasons, haven't ended up with a wooden spoon, so work that one out. They've somehow managed to win enough games not to be the worst team. But they've got some interesting players coming through. But again, we'll have to see about recruitment as well. Getting the right pieces in to supplement the team. But the Dragons and Tigers have been underperforming for years as clubs. They've been underperforming for years. If the West Tigers board got the sack, could it happen to the Dragons? Well, they would have to really reach rock bottom, which would be back-to-back wooden spoons. They would have to swap places with the Tigers, and Flano would have to really. Shane Flanagan is not going to fail as a coach here, but he has got difficulty in turning the situation around. Where the expectation is we should be a top 8 side, the reality is they're not, and he's coming into a situation with a divided ballroom like the Tigers. I think the Dragons, it will be a bit more difficult to sack the entire board because of the Win Stadium, the Win Group, the media group, who have a big stake in the club. I think it suddenly becomes a bit more difficult, but I do think that with the way they've handled the last 2 head coaches and sacking them, and the way that they handled those sackings, and the fact that they haven't been in the top 8 for a while pre-COVID, and they haven't been consistently in the top 8 for some time. Again, much like the Tigers, they've been more consistent in reaching the top 8 just than the Tigers, but not really. Is a concern. I would argue that the roster isn't looking particularly strong. Much like the Tigers, I reckon they're going to be the bottom 2 again. I honestly think Dragons and Tigers will be the bottom 2 potentially. A successful season for those sides would be close to top 8, but not quite. Again, you've got a dual venture club with 2 home grounds, much like the Tigers, and they haven't really gone right. We're staying in Wollongong or we're staying in Illawarra, much like the Tigers with Campbelltown and Leichhardt. They haven't gone right. Pick a stadium and make that the home. So yeah, it's they're 2 badly run clubs. and I can do my predictions for the 2024 season. I generally do my NRL predictions. I would say recency bias is a thing, but looking at it, I expect improvement. But in seasons past, I have been surprised by teams failing, like the Rabbitohs just falling apart, the Broncos falling apart last season before last, from a strong position to finishing ninth. I did not expect the Broncos to be top two this year. I did not expect Penrith to win three in a row. I'd say they're favourites, but to do 5 grand finals and 4 premierships in a row, with the constant turnover of players now, yeah, they've got a production on talent coming in, and they have very good recruitment. But yeah, I would say they're favourites, but I wouldn't say they're clear favourites. I wouldn't say it's getting harder for them. If they were to make 5 finals in a row, that is a lot of it. That's a lot of extra games that players like Cleary are playing, like Dylan Edwards are playing, like and you add that up, that's like a whole full season extra games that players are playing. And this is where we start talking about load management and player rotation and squad depth. Look what happened to the Roosters trying to go for 3 in a row. How very quickly the Roosters fell off a cliff. Look at the Melbourne Storm; they're not the side they were. Trying to go for trying to get to finals all the time. They haven't been back to a grand final since Cameron Smith's last game in 2020. So I look at the Roosters and how quickly they fell off a cliff. And I look at the Storm, and I look at it, and I go, they're the last 2 teams to win, not called Penrith. They're not close to on last season's play. They're not close to Penrith right now. And I look at it, and yeah, they on paper, yes, but then you've got to factor in all those extra games that are being played. How that catches up with players. I mean, Cleary is a rep player. He's an international player. He's playing a lot of these extra games. He's had a lot of injuries. He's starting to have injuries. He's playing injured sometimes. While Penrith have avoided a lot of major injuries in their squad, they have lost a lot of key players. They weren't as dominant last year, and they had to come with a record-breaking win from behind against Brisbane last year in that grand final. Took a lot out of them. We shall see, I think. We shall see. I think it's going to be interesting to see ultimately if they get the minor premiership again, if they make the grand final again. But they've been so dominant, and their systems, that they could have a down year this year and then bounce back in 2025. I have no doubt on that. They could have a season where they might make top 4 but have a bit of a down year, maybe don't make the grand final, and have an off season and then bounce back in 2025 because of the systems that are in place with the junior development, with reserve break, with the New South Wales Cup, the Jersey Flag, the talent coming through. And they could have that down year next year, and then bounce back in 2025. Or they could just continue to steamroll on because of the structures they have in place, the systems they have in place. And then we're discussing, obviously, the great St George sides of yesteryear, and the great Wigan sides, and St Helens sides, which have been so dominant over many, many years, and how they won so many in a row, and how they were consistently. And that's very hard to do. The reason why it hasn't happened in the NRL for so long is Parramatta was the last side to be on this kind of level. and that was in the 80s. So hard to do. They've had a tremendous run in recent years, and they've got great systems in place. And there's a lot of people comparing the Penrith system to the Melbourne Storm system, and to a certain extent the Roosters, to a certain extent, where the coach is there long term. So stability, head coach. There's the pathways in place, the talent scouting and the pathways in place. And then when they bring, experienced players in, when they sign that free agent, a player who's off contract, they get the right players in that suit the system. Wayne Bennett last year at the Dolphins, can he get another job? He's hinted that he may be interested in the New Zealand head job for the Test side. He has dropped serious hints about coaching New Zealand and picking up the Kiwis head job that Maguire has moved on to New South Wales. But there's a succession plan at the Dolphins in place. I don't know, maybe if New Zealand think that he's the right fit for their Test side, and taking that Test side to continue with the momentum that Michael Maguire left behind. I can see him potentially take. I can't see him taking another club or helping out Queensland, and I can't see him taking another club job after this. But potentially the Test side, yes. It's up to him when he decides to finally go, I'm done as a head coach. Bearing in mind we've got that 18th expansion team at some point in the next 2 years being announced when they're going to join. Can you potentially go to another expansion side? Or would that be Craig Bellamy or Trent Robinson or another long-term coach who's had a track record of success? But you saw with Tim Sheens coming back that he was done. He was done as a head coach. Even though he was a great head coach in the past, he was done. Wayne Bennett, Dolphins didn't make finals, did they? They had a great start to the season, and then injuries and that squad depth got tested, and they just fizzled out. But last year at the Dolphins, we shall see. We shall see if he decides to coach New Zealand, and if there are discussions. They'd be mad not to talk to him. He is, off contract at the Dolphins. They've got that succession plan in place. They would be mad not to talk to him with his success in the game. He's been an international coach before. He's coached State of Origin before. Great track record as a head coach. Mad not to consider Wayne Bennett. Mad not to consider him with the amount of games he's coached and what he's won in the game. But it's whether he can commit long term to New Zealand more than just coaching in the short term. If he can commit to the next World Cup, that's something that we should wait and see. Plus, we've got to see where the 18th team gets placed and who they want to coach that expansion team, because an expansion team is coming, and I think it's coming in 2025. So there's a lot going on in the background there, and we'll see what happens with Wayne Bennett. It's like Sir Alex Ferguson and Arsene Wenger in English football. They generational managers that coached basically for a generation and had a lot of success. So yeah, there's a watch this space with Wayne Bennett. Anyway, I'm gonna call the live stream there because it's nearly lunchtime. Really appreciate all the questions. We've been going for just over 3 hours. I do apologise for the lack of content. I have been feeling a little bit under the weather. Work's been a bit hectic, and I've just been needed a little bit of me time last couple of weeks. There will be a Christmas Day, maybe Boxing Day live stream. There always is the Christmas Boxing Day live stream, and that will be obviously fun to obviously have. It always is fun to have a Christmas Day or Boxing Day live stream. Always great fun to do them. But for me, for now, thank you very much for watching. I will answer the 18 team. What should TV deal should it be? Should there be 3 TV networks? I don't think there's a third network that can sump up the money. I don't think 7 or 10 have spare change floating around in Australia. Maybe they should try and grow the US TV deal, as they are committed for the next 5 years at least to going to Vegas. Potentially trying to encourage a TV network in the US like ESPN, but there's only a limited amount of dollars. So there's a limited amount of companies that can sponsor clubs and sponsor with adverts. I don't know. I don't think there is another carrier willing. But there is the NRL website for those outside of Australia and New Zealand, which I subscribe to. So, and that's through KO Sports, and that's the Fox programming. So there's that deal in place ongoing with streaming services overseas that makes them money. It's an interesting one, though. It really is. Netflix have hinted at potentially picking up some live sport, but I don't think the NRL is on the top of their wish list for live sports leagues. They've not had any rugby league documentaries on Netflix. They've had a lot of motorsport and F1. They've had a lot of football. They've had other sports covered. They haven't done any documentary series on the NRL yet, and rugby league in general. So that'll be an interesting one. Amazon. I don't know how big Amazon Prime is in Australia and how big their reach is, but we'll see. We shall see what happens. We'll see if another TV broadcaster or online streaming service, comes in to pick up broadcast rights. But with KO Sports, every game is live or on demand overseas outside Australia and New Zealand, which is the NRL website, which I subscribe to. So, and you get all the other added on programming there that's on the Fox League channel. So we shall see. But anyway, for me for now, thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate it. And I'll have some more content for you very, very soon.